Hey guys, welcome back. For some of you who are brand new to Jira, I just want to take a couple of minutes to introduce and talk about what Jira is. If you're already familiar with all of that, feel free to skip this video and head on to the next one where we'll talk about what Jira version we'll be using in this course, but this shouldn't take too long. So what is Jira? Well, it's many things, but I like to call it a work management tool that you can use to manage your projects, track issues, administer support. I could go on, but it's essentially a part of a family of products made by Atlassian to help all kinds of teams manage their work. Atlassian is based out of Australia and have offices worldwide and is a publicly traded company. They're actually doing pretty well for themselves. So these are some of the products as part of Atlassian's family of tools. You can see that they are grouped into categories in terms of planning and tracking your work with Jira, or offering some kind of support service or help desk solution coupled with incident management, or collaborating with your team members on work or content, and even having some development tools to help manage your source code and repositories. I'm not going to go into each one right now, but I encourage you to check out Atlassian's website to learn more about what each has to offer. In this course, we will be focusing on Jira Software and Confluence because both are very popular and go hand in hand. Now keep in mind, Jira Work Management is for business teams, while Jira Software is for software teams. But when you look at things like managing workflows, project boards, issue types, all of that applies to both of them. It's just the Agile methodology part of it that is specific to Jira Software. But when you sign up for Jira Software, you also get Jira Work Management. But to clarify, I will be focusing on the Agile specific functionality, and the course assumes we're managing software projects. Just know that the core concepts you learn around workflows and boards will apply to the business project templates available in work management. Okay, so why go with Jira? First of all, I would argue that it is the #1 project management tool out there, with the comprehensive set of abilities that it has. I also like the fact that it focuses on helping Agile teams manage software projects. In fact, I feel it is so comprehensive that companies now look for Jira experience on resumes. But Jira does have a steep learning curve and requires you to know what you're doing, especially if you're going to be the one managing it or even using it to manage teams. It's very customizable, and you even have countless add-ons or apps to enhance the already existing functionality. But I'm guessing you already kinda knew most of this, or else why would you be here, right? Alright, so now let's talk about the different Jira platforms and versions and what we will be using in this course. Okay, so guys, Jira has different deployment types. We've got Cloud, Server, and Data Center. However, Atlassian has announced end of life for all their server-based products by 2024. This doesn't concern you if you're not already on server, and we'll get into those details in just a bit. Now, regardless of which deployment type you're on, I recommend reviewing the entire course because the core concepts between the different types are the same. You may only notice subtle UI differences. Now, when it comes to Cloud, it is super easy to set up. Just register your Jira site name and that's it. Atlassian sets up your entire site for you, and going forward, you never have to worry about any maintenance work, such as upgrades, security, scalability. All of that is managed and taken care of for you. But all of that comes with a subscription cost, either on a monthly or annual basis. Server was probably the second most popular deployment type, but like I said, this is going away by 2024. This setup required you to install and host Jira yourself on-premise, either on a server in the office or in a data center or cloud server environment such as AWS or Azure. This is where you would be responsible for managing everything from upgrades, security, performance. But on the flip side, because it's locally installed, you have more power over customizability. You have access to server logs, the Jira database, so you can run different queries to get the data, install custom code, things like that. But all of that did come with the headache of managing things yourself. So if your company is on Jira Server, your options are to either migrate to Jira Cloud or Jira Data Center. But definitely don't count on remaining on server after 2024. And if you're brand new to Jira, chances are you'll be starting off on the cloud, so you can just take everything I said about Jira Server and just pretend that didn't happen. There's no need to learn about it now that Atlassian is getting rid of it. Data Center is their third deployment type and is actually like Server except on steroids. It's the same as Server but at scale and is meant for enterprise level companies that are global and have thousands of users and have a requirement of uptime, high performance, redundancy, and things like that. So far, it looks like Atlassian is going to keep their data center offering, so it's basically going to come down to cloud versus data center. But from all the events and webinars I've been to, especially recently, I've noticed Atlassian doing a massive push towards cloud, and their server end-of-life announcement further validates that. So in this course, we will be using and focusing on Jira Cloud only. Okay, so now with respect to cloud, there are actually different versions of cloud, believe it or not. There's now a free version of Jira Cloud. They once had this way back in the day, and then they did not have it for many years, but have now brought it back. So the free version gets you up to 10 users, but it misses some functionality in the form of advanced permissions and has limited automation and storage space and no support from Atlassian. You basically just have the community support available. Mind you, the Atlassian community is huge and their public forums are very active. The standard version is what we will be using in this course, and is pretty much what Jira used to be before they gave out the free version. With Jira Standard, your automation and storage limits are higher. For up to 10 users, you have, you only have to pay $10 a month, and you also get standard support from Atlassian whenever needed. The premium version has no restrictions on automation or storage. Well, there kind of is a restriction with automation, but it is so large that it's pretty much unlimited. They guarantee 99.9% uptime, offer premium support, and they have also included a bunch of other features such as advanced roadmaps for project planning, admin insights, a cloud sandbox environment for you to test your Jira config changes, many things like that. I can definitely see the appeal in premium, but it is more expensive. I wish they also had a 10-user tier where you pay a fixed amount just like we have for Jira Standard, but that's not the case for Premium, and you have to pay on a per-user basis even if you have one single user. And now, there's actually an enterprise version of Jira Cloud as well, which is basically everything you get with Premium plus more. And the subtle difference here is that you can have unlimited instances of Jira within your organization. You get Atlassian Access, which is for centralizing administration and user management. You can choose where your data is hosted in terms of geographical location, 99.95% uptime, 24/7 dedicated support, all that jazz. This plan is the newest of them all and actually requires you to contact Atlassian's sales team for pricing, at least as of this recording. But clearly, based on the features, Enterprise is really meant for those really big, large-scale enterprise companies. So I invite you to check out the links I've provided in the resources for more information on all these different cloud versions. So to confirm, we will be using Jira Standard on cloud. I know a lot of you will probably just sign up for the free version. Just keep in mind that some of the functionality I walk through in this course will not be available for you. But you do have the option of starting a Jira Standard free trial so that while you're learning, you have access to all the functionality. And I'll show you how to set all that up as well. In fact, we're almost there. Let me just do a quick walkthrough of the course structure, give you some tidbits, and then we'll set up our first cloud instance. Alright, so as I mentioned, this course will be focused on Jira Cloud, and so if you don't have a Jira instance to learn with already, I definitely recommend setting one up. Atlassian makes it really easy to set up a cloud instance. Just go to Atlassian.com, And keep in mind that this website might look different in the future, but just look for a button that is prominent and calling you out to try it for free. So I'm going to click on Try Now. So here you will see the various products listed, but we're going to go with Jira Software. So I'll click on Try Cloud. And now you'll get some more options. We've already got Jira Software selected, but Atlassian asks if you'd like to also bundle some of their other products like Confluence or Jira Service Management and start a trial of multiple products together. But we'll be setting up Confluence later on in the course, so I'll skip this and I'll just hit Next. Now, if you don't already have an Atlassian account, at this point you will be asked to set one up with an email address. And then once your account is created, you just have to specify the URL that you want for your Jira instance, and that's it. Here, I'm already logged into my Atlassian account, which is under this email address. And I already have a few Jira instances created under this account, so I'm just going to create another one. Now, I also want to mention that this part of this video is a newer recording as of September 2021, because the experience of setting up a Jira instance changed since the last version of this video. So for now, I'm going to be setting up a random test instance, but the URL that I actually use in the course is Jira Course Cloud. So you can see after typing it in, it says that it's already taken, and that's because I've already created it. So just for this demo purposes, I'm just going to tack on demo. And so it looks like that's available. So let's go with that, and I'll click agree. And so now Atlassian is going to start setting up the instance. Now Atlassian might ask you some questions, but I'm just going to skip them for now. Inviting teammates is something that we're going to do later in the course, so I'm just going to uncheck this and hit continue. And here there's another short questionnaire, and I believe the purpose of this is just so Atlassian can recommend a project template for your first project, but again, I'm going to skip this. And so here we are. Now we get to pick our first project, and we need to decide what project template we want to use. Now, if you had filled out the previous questionnaire, it might even recommend one of these templates. But for now, let's just go ahead and pick Scrum. And it talks a little about the template, gives you some information. We're just going to go ahead and click on Use Template. Okay, so now you get the option of what kind of project you want to create. This may seem a bit confusing at first, but we've basically got two project types: team managed and company managed. Team managed projects used to be called next gen projects, while company managed projects was called classic projects, just in case you run into these other terms at some point. Now, team managed projects are basically meant for autonomous teams, or teams that are independent and self-controlled, and don't want to rely on a Jira admin to set things up for them. It allows the project admin to set up all aspects of the projects themselves, without needing help from the admin of the entire Jira instance. Company managed projects, on the other hand, can only be configured by a Jira admin, who is the admin of the entire Jira instance. Project admins for these kinds of projects have limited control of what they can do. Now, I have a section later in the course that is fully dedicated to next-gen or team-managed projects, but most of the course focuses on company-managed projects. So, for your first project, just go ahead and select Company-Managed Project. Hopefully the explanation of the two wasn't too confusing, but as we get through the course, hopefully that distinction will become more clear. Okay, so the next step is to give our project a name. So I'll just call this my first project. And it suggests a key, which is basically a unique key for the project. I'll leave it as is. And I'll click on Create Project. And that's it. Your instance is created. You are in your first project. You're currently looking at the active sprint page. There are no sprints ongoing right now, and we will study this page functionality in more detail later on. In fact, I'm going to dismiss this quick start. One thing I do want to point out is I want to come up here and click on this cogwheel, and you will see that there are Jira settings available. If you've just created the instance, then you will be a Jira admin and you would be able to see all these options. But let's go to the billing section, and that opens it up in another tab. And let's click on Manage Subscriptions. And I'm just going to click on Got It for now. You can see that this instance was set up under the free plan. Now, as I mentioned, there are some differences between the free and standard plan, and to better show important functionality in Jira, I will be upgrading this to standard. So I'll click on Change, and you can see that there is the free, standard, and the premium options, and you can see that the standard offers some more functionality that the free plan does not. Premium obviously has a lot more, but we're not going to be working with the premium plan in this course, so I'm just going to click on Select Standard. Now, as of today, it looks like Atlassian is offering a 14-day trial for the standard plan. Now, this may or may not be enough. Hopefully, it's enough time for you to try and learn and follow the course. But one thing I'll suggest is that you can always reach out to Atlassian support and just tell them that you want an extension of the trial. Just let them know that you're still evaluating Jira or you're learning Jira and you need more time. And more often than not, in fact, I've never seen any situation where they haven't obliged and they haven't extended the trial for you. So definitely keep that as an option. So I'm going to agree to the terms and start the trial. Now the next step is that it actually asks for your billing information, but you can actually skip this. So just go ahead and click Cancel, and so you don't have to put in any credit card or any payment information. Let's head back to the Manage Subscriptions page, and you can see that we're currently on the standard plan. And that's it. So we have our Jira Cloud instance set up on the correct plan. And the best thing about this whole process was that no credit card was required. After the trial ends, the instance will automatically expire if you choose not to provide billing information and continue with the subscription. All right, now this billing section was opened up in a new tab. If I go back to the first project that we created, you can see that this project is empty. So in the next video, I will show you how to create a project with sample data to play with. Also keep in mind that going forward, you'll notice that I am no longer in this instance. This is the Jira Course Cloud demo instance. But like I said, I only set this up just to show you the new process of setting up a cloud instance. In the next video, I'm going to revert back to the main instance that I use for the remainder of the course, which is just Jira Course Cloud. All right, so I'll see you there. So as we saw while setting up this brand new instance, there was no option to add some sample data. But in order to really learn and play around with Jira, it's always good to have some sample data to play with. Now, Jira doesn't let you create a project with sample data, but it does let you create a board with sample data, which indirectly creates a project as well. It's a bit strange, but let me show you how. All you have to do is go up to the top search bar, and you can see that it expands, and it lists out the first project we created, and you'll see that there was also an MFB board that was created for that project. But what we will do is we will go to All Boards. Now, as of recording this video, there seems to be some kind of bug where clicking on this boards link doesn't really do anything, but I can open it up in a new tab, so that's what I will do. Atlassian just launched this complete new interface as of recording this video, and so I'm sure their team is still dealing with a couple of quirks that they need to fix. So now we're in the boards page. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a board, and you will see here that we have two options. We can create a Scrum board or a Kanban board. And below that, you will see an option to create a Scrum board with sample data or a Kanban board with sample data. Now keep in mind that these two links over here will only show up if you are logged in as an administrator. If you have just set up your instance and you're the only user in that instance, chances are you are the administrator, and so you will likely see these options. But if you don't, just keep in mind that you're probably not logged in as an admin. Alright, so I'm going to choose the Scrum side, and I'm going to click on Create a Scrum Board with Sample Data. And you'll see that here in the next step, it's asking you what you want that project to be called. Because when you create a board has to sit within a project. So it's going to ask you for the project name, and I'll just leave this the same. Sample Scrum project, I'll leave the project key the same, and my user will be the project lead. So we'll go ahead and we'll create the board. And that's it. Now you have another project called Sample Scrum Project. We are in the backlog view of that project, and you can see a whole bunch of tickets and issues and data that we can now play with. In this section, we will first go through what Agile means and get a high-level understanding of the flow of work in Agile, primarily focusing on two types of Agile methodologies, Scrum and Kanban. These are the two methodologies that you can use in Jira. We will then introduce and define some Jira terms. In the last section, when I was describing what you would learn, I threw in some buzzwords such as issues and workflows. So we'll spend some time defining what these are in Jira, as well as other terms that make up Jira. By the end of this section, you will be familiar with how Scrum and Kanban work, what makes up Jira, and how it all fits together into the Agile process. Agile is a software development methodology that has an iterative approach to development, basically building and releasing software incrementally from the start of the project, rather than trying to deliver everything all at once right at the end. This iterative approach involves planning a development iteration, implementing the work planned for that iteration, and delivering a version of the product by the end of it. Feedback is then gathered and used to plan the next iteration, and this process continues until the product is fully polished. This process allows the team to adapt to changing requirements, as the feedback loop starts at a very early stage. So if some requirements change because the iterations are relatively short, these changes can be fed into the next iteration, thereby keeping the overall development flexible and adaptive. And at the end of an iteration, there should be a shippable product or group of features. This frequent delivery of the product results in customer satisfaction, as they are able to monitor the progress of development and are able to test and provide feedback early on, thereby ensuring that their requirements are met and the team is on track. The goal is to keep requirements and documentation lightweight and flexible, and this can only be achieved by ensuring close collaboration between team members, especially between business people and the developers. Now, there are many Agile methodologies, all of which follow these concepts to some extent. Jira supports two methodologies, Scrum and Kanban. So, Scrum is probably the most highly recognized Agile methodology. It works by breaking projects down into smaller bits of user functionality represented by epics and user stories. An epic can be defined as a larger body of work, or work that cannot be completed in a given iteration, and so it usually gets broken into multiple user stories. A user story, or just story, is basically the smallest unit of work and can represent a feature that is to be developed. If you look at this course as an example, you could say that for the Jira course project, this Jira and Agile concepts section is an epic, and the individual stories within the epic are each of the lectures within this section, including this one. Stories are usually defined using a particular format, by specifying the type of user involved, what the user is trying to achieve, and the benefit for achieving it. For example, as a manager, I would like to learn about Jira so that I can use it to manage projects using Agile workflows. So once features for a project are gathered and corresponding user stories are defined, they are then prioritized and continuously implemented and delivered in short cycles known as sprints. So this is the basic flow of work with Scrum. You start off with a product backlog that contains all the features you want to build in the form of user stories. These features or stories get prioritized, so the most important features are at the top of the backlog. It's also important that these features at the top of the backlog are in a ready state with all requirements and details laid out, which essentially means that it is ready for development. A group of features are then selected from the product backlog and made into the sprint backlog, basically representing that these features are what the team will implement during this sprint. A sprint is a predetermined length of time, usually between 2 to 4 weeks, where the development team takes the tickets from the sprint backlog and gets them to a done state by the end of the sprint. And during the sprint, the team has a daily 15-minute Scrum meeting at the same place and time every day to discuss the progress of the sprint and make sure things are on track. And by the end of the sprint, the team should have a shippable group of features that can then be reviewed by customers or relevant stakeholders. Now, when it comes to Scrum, there are a few roles with specific responsibilities. The product owner basically owns the product and defines the vision of the product. In other words, he or she defines what should be built and why. As a result, the product owner is responsible for defining what goes into the product backlog. He also creates the user stories, prioritizes them, and ensures they are groomed with all relevant details. The development team basically builds the product and is responsible for providing shippable features at the end of the sprint. And the Scrum Master facilitates the Scrum process and basically makes sure the team is on track during a sprint and that there are no blockers on anyone that would prevent the sprint goal from being achieved. During the Scrum process, there are a few events that are critical to being successful. The sprint planning is where the sprint backlog is created by selecting the fully groomed and highest priority features from the product backlog that the dev team can work on during the next sprint. The development team then goes ahead and provides their estimates for time and effort to implement the features, and all of this happens during that sprint planning meeting. Now, a quick note on estimation. You can either estimate in hours or story points. Story point estimation is basically done where estimates are made relative to the smallest component or item with the known level of difficulty. After a few sprints, the team will know how many story points they can complete in a sprint, also known as team velocity, so they can use this metric to predict how many story points they're going to be able to fit in the next sprint. So once the sprint planning meeting is complete and the sprint starts, a daily 15-minute Scrum meeting is held with all the members of the team and mainly facilitated by the Scrum Master. This meeting is always limited to 15 minutes, or at least should be limited to 15 minutes, so the team members usually stand up while doing it to ensure that it doesn't go any longer. During this meeting, every team member gets a turn to talk about what the person did yesterday, what the plans are for today, and if there are any blockers. Now, if there are blockers, this is where the Scrum Master can step in and work with that team member to get things unblocked and moving again. So the stand-up Scrum meeting occurs every day of the sprint, and at the end of the sprint, there is a sprint review and retrospective meeting. The review part of the meeting basically entails reviewing the features or stories that were completed or not completed, and working with the product owner on shipping the completed features, if required. The retrospective part of the meeting is to simply reflect on the last sprint and talk about potential to improve the overall process. Now, what happens during a sprint? The team can monitor and update the progress of work through a sprint board or Scrum Board, and this board is one of the major features available on Jira. In fact, this image is an example of a Scrum Board from Jira. A Scrum Board is typically structured in the form of columns, and the goal of the sprint is to basically move all the tickets from the leftmost column to the right. You may have seen physical Scrum Boards being created in offices where they would use a whiteboard, draw the columns on there, and use sticky notes to represent the user stories and manually move the sticky notes from one column to another. Fortunately, Jira digitizes all of that for us. This example shows the most basic board, where at the start of the sprint, the to-do column basically represents the sprint backlog, and developers would start working on tickets and move them to the in-progress column, and once implementation is complete, they are moved to the done column. The goal of the sprint obviously is to have all tickets in the done column. This board can also look different for every team. So some teams may want to have more statuses or columns. For example, tickets that are in progress, when complete, will go to a code review column. And then once code review is complete, it will then go into a testing column before it finally gets to the done column. And some of this customization is possible in Jira and is actually something that we'll be doing later on in this course. So every team can change the board and add columns to represent their unique workflow steps, and Jira allows you to do this very well. So to summarize Scrum, the product owner creates and manages the product backlog by filling it with PBIs, or product backlog items, also known as user stories, which can represent a feature to be developed. A sprint planning meeting is then held with the entire team, including developers, where the highest priority stories, which are usually at the top of the backlog, the product backlog, are put into the sprint backlog. During this process, the developers also provide an estimate of effort for each of the stories. The sprint then begins, and every day there is a 15-minute stand-up meeting to discuss the progress of the sprint. The Scrum Master facilitates this and ensures the team is on track and unblocked. And at the end of the sprint, a review and retrospective meeting is held with all team members, and the product owner works with the team to package the completed features into a potentially shippable product. This is basically the essence of Scrum workflow. Now, moving on to Kanban. Kanban is another and more simpler form of Agile development. It also entails having a board to visualize the flow of work. However, there are no sprints involved in this case. The main goal is to have a smooth flow of work from start to completion without any stoppage or bottlenecks. And in order to do this, the team must define what that flow of work entails, as in how does a particular work item go from start to completion? What are the various steps or stages that it would go through, and what is involved with transitioning the work items through each stage, and ultimately getting it to a done state? All this would be represented through a Kanban board, where the goal is to move all work items from left to right, just like on a Scrum board. Kanban teams can also set a limit on the number of work items in each column of the board. These limits basically represent the capacity of the team. As the work starts flowing through the Kanban board, the team can monitor the state of the board to adapt their processes, identify bottlenecks, and make improvements. Here's an example of a Kanban board on Jira. It looks almost exactly like a Scrum board. Here, there are 4 columns, so the backlog can represent all the tickets or features that need to be worked on, but the selected for development column would only include the highest priority tickets, and developers would only start working on tickets that are in this column. You can see here that the in progress column is highlighted in red, and this is actually a feature of Jira. As I mentioned, Kanban teams can set a work in progress limit, and in this case the limit is set to 1. As you can see at the top of the column right beside in progress, it states a maximum limit of 1. So since there are 2 tickets in progress, Jira alerts you about it, and this is where the team can collaborate to look at potential bottlenecks and work to get the board back to a normal state. This is basically the essence of Kanban workflow. So in summary, we've talked about how work flows in both Scrum and Kanban methodologies. An example of where the Scrum process would benefit the most is when you have a project with defined features that can be estimated by the development team. This could be a completely new product or project or group of features where the requirements are fully laid out. Kanban, on the other hand, I feel would be a good process to follow for things like support tickets, as in bugs that are found in the system or support requests sent in by end users. The reason is because most of these things, most of the time, are difficult to estimate or predict, and so the best way to get them done would be to keep the highest priority tickets at the top of the backlog and have your support development team work on them one by one and get them to a done state in the quickest manner possible while monitoring the work in progress. I also want to end this lecture by pointing out that we have just scratched the surface of these concepts and discussed them at a very high level, but there is a ton of content on Agile, Scrum, and Kanban on the web, and I have provided a few resources that would be worth checking out if you have time and would like to learn more. So let's now get back into Jira and define some terms. Let's take a look at some of the terms that make up Jira. An issue is the essence of Jira and basically represents a work item, any work item, or anything that requires an action from a person. So when you create a ticket in Jira, you are essentially creating an issue. In other words, epics, stories, bugs, feature quests, tasks, all of these are issues of a different issue type. So when you create an issue, you can create an issue of an epic issue type, or a story issue type, or a task issue type, etc. You can create your own issue types in Jira as well, but ultimately every ticket created in Jira is referred to as an issue. It contains basic fields such as title, description, due dates, priorities, status, etc., and you can make your own custom fields as well. A project pretty much represents the normal term or meaning of a project and is basically a collection of issues. It can be a software dev project, a help desk system, general task manager, so on and so forth. Obviously, if you're looking at using Jira Agile or Jira software, you're most likely engaging in software development projects. Pretty much everything can be customized within a project, including who gets access to it, the issue types available in a project, the workflows used, and many more. Which brings me to workflow. A workflow is a set of statuses that an issue in a project can have, along with the transitions between statuses that the issue can go through. This image is an example of a workflow and what it looks like in Jira. Now, versions basically help track releases of software. So remember when I mentioned that at the end of a sprint, you should have a shippable product or group of features. So for tracking purposes, Jira allows you to create a version and add whatever issues that are going to be released into that version. You could either create a version at the end of every sprint, if you're releasing that often, or you could create a version over a set of sprints. Or if you've already identified the stages at which you want to release the software, you can create your different versions well in advance and assign the respective issues to each version. In Scrum, a version is usually pre-planned and is released when the planned work is complete, whereas in Kanban, a version can be released at any time and will contain all the issues that are complete or in the done state at that time. Jira components are just a feature that Jira offers to create subsections of a project. They are basically used to group issues within a project. So, for example, perhaps your project is broken into back-end development and front-end development. So you could create both of these as components and be able to group your issues accordingly. It's almost like a category of work. And an advantage of having components is that you can configure issues created under a component to have a default assignee, so that when created, it's automatically assigned to that person. So for example, you want all backend dev issues to be assigned to your lead backend developer, who can then delegate it out to other developers. You can do this through component configuration. And lastly, Jira also uses the other common Agile terms that we've already discussed, such as Scrum, Kanban, backlog, sprints, etc. Alright, now that we've identified the main Jira terms, we are now ready to take our first dive into Jira, starting off as a user working within an Agile team. In the previous section, I talked about Agile, and in particular, Scrum and Kanban workflow, and also defined some basic Jira terms and how they fit into Agile. Part of the Scrum walkthrough involved discussing the various roles or stakeholders involved in the process. So in this section, we will be assuming the role of one of those stakeholders, the development team. This section would actually apply to any team member working within Jira software, but applies most to people who are either developers or designers or in quality assurance. The primary tasks for these guys involve working with issues within a project, understanding how to edit and work on issues, search for issues, configure their own dashboards to make themselves more efficient, and so on. So we'll start off this section by taking our first look at Jira and the basic UI layout. We will then look at an example issue and all the details that make up an issue in Jira. We will also take a look at the Agile boards, how you can update issues on the boards, and in general, search for issues, create filters, and also set up your own custom dashboard. Alright, let's take a look at the Jira user interface and high-level navigation flow. But first, a very quick history lesson. Prior to 2018, Jira had a horizontal navigation bar at the top just like you see here. But at some point in 2018, they revamped their interface and turned it into a vertical sidebar on the left. I was not really a fan, and I may not have been the only one. They must have received a lot of feedback and criticism, so as of March 2020, they reverted back to that horizontal bar at the top. So if you're seeing Jira for the first time, and this is what it looks like, congratulations, you managed to avoid that phase of various navigation changes, and hopefully this will stick for a while. Also, keep in mind that this recording is being done very soon after they launched this new UI, so going forward things might change and look a bit different here and there, but I'm hoping the main structure will remain the same. So let's take a look at this nav bar. Starting on the left, we have a grid icon, which is basically your application switcher. So if you are using other applications like Confluence or Service Desk, this is how you can easily switch to them. If you are not subscribed to them, as is the case here, and if you try to click, it will ask you to try it out, and Atlasian will probably set you up with a free trial. Also keep in mind that if you have multiple cloud instances that you've created under your Atlasian account, you can find them here and easily switch to them. As you can see, I've been playing around with a bunch of different instances, so that's another easy way to access them. Alright, so moving on, here we have the logo for your site. And when you click on it, it will take you to your homepage. Now I have just set up this instance, and my Jira homepage is currently set to the projects page. This is the same page that you see when you go to the projects dropdown and you click on view all projects. And it just displays a list of your projects, the unique project key, the type, the project lead, and we will take a look at all these pages in more detail in future videos. For now, let's focus on the navigation bar. And let's take a look at this Your Work tab. Now this page is a great summary of things that are most recent and relevant to you. So here at the top, you've got a list of your recent projects with some information on them, and it also includes a handy link to the Agile board that's associated with the project. And below that, you've got 4 tabs. So the Worked On tab will list out all the issues that you are working on. As you can see, there hasn't been much activity, so that's why nothing is showing up here yet. And then the View tab just displays the different things that you have viewed recently, whether it's a dashboard or a filter or project or even issues. It's a kind of summary of things that you may have recently accessed. Assigned to me is a list of all the issues that are assigned to you, and looks like they are grouping it by the status. And then finally, the Starred tab is basically kind of like your favorites. So for example, let's go back to the View All Projects page again. And let's say I'm going to be accessing sample Scrum project quite frequently, so I'm going to star it. Now, if I go back to the Your Work tab, you can see the project now appearing under Starred. Okay, now when you set up your instance, you may get a little banner at the top here suggesting to set this page as your Jira homepage. I have been playing around with it, so the banner is no longer appearing for me, but I do recommend, and I also would personally prefer, to have this page as my home page because it gives me information that I feel would be relevant, especially when I'm accessing an instance and accessing the same projects over and over again. It would be good to have direct links to them right in this home page. So what I can do is I can come here to the top right, click on the ellipsis, and switch this page to be my home page. So now if I go to the View All Projects page, but now I click on the site logo, I will now be taken to the Your Work tab. If you do want to switch your home page back to being the All Projects page, then you can do that again by coming back to the ellipsis again and switching back to Projects. Now, I'm not sure if in the future Atlassian will allow you to set any page as your home page. I know that there is a ticket created for it as a feature request, and I've provided the link to that ticket in the resources of this video. So perhaps going forward, you might have that ability to set any page as your home page. All right, so as we continue down this nav bar, we've kind of touched on projects. It lists out the recent projects, your start projects, and you can also create a project directly from the navigation bar. Filters are very useful in that they allow you to save your searches. And we will take a look at this in more detail as well. But again, in the filters dropdown, it gives you the recent filters you've accessed. You can view all the filters or even start a brand new search. So if we go to view all filters, and let's just say I decide to star one of these. These two filters we'll look at later, but basically every Agile board is based off of a Jira filter. So that's why the two boards that were created have these two filters associated with them respectively. So now that I've starred this filter, if I go back to the home page and click on the filter dropdown again, you can see now that there's a starred list and a recently accessed list. Moving on, a dashboard is a page that you can create that acts kind of like a control panel and gives you various kinds of information that's relevant to you. And the information is provided through things like gadgets. So right now there is just one dashboard listed here. And let's take a look at the all dashboards page. Yep, it looks like just one default dashboard created by Jira. So let's take a look at that one. So these four different boxes that you see here, these are what they call gadgets. And you can customize this entire page from top to bottom and add different types of gadgets that display different pieces of information that is relevant to you. So for example, in this default dashboard, the first gadget here is just a introduction gadget. Below that, we've got a gadget that displays a list of all the projects. Then we've got the assigned to me, which displays all the issues that are assigned to the user that is logged in. And finally, at the bottom, we have an activity stream, which is kind of like a news feed. It just gives you a high-level summary of things that have happened in your instance recently. So this is the system or the default dashboard, and you can also create custom dashboards and share them with your team members. Speaking of teams, let's go to the People tab. This is where you can set up your teams. Now, this is a brand new concept that Atlassian introduced in, I believe, 2020, or could have been late 2019. A team is basically a collection of users and is meant to represent real-world teams. So if you are a developer in an organization that has multiple teams, you can set them up here. You can set up your own dev team, add your team members, and anyone in the org can then see what all the teams are, what they're working on, things like that. This concept is still being properly built out by Atlassian, and I'll try to have some content on it later in the course that at least speaks to the benefits as it stands currently. Beside that, you've got the app section. So if your instance has additional add-ons or plugins or apps installed, you would be able to find them here. And then finally, you've got the create button, which is basically your create issue button. You can either click this or you can use the letter C as a hotkey to create an issue. And this is available from anywhere in your instance. Okay, so that's the left side of the navbar. Moving over to the right side, you've got your search box. And when you click on it, it'll expand it out And below that, you can see kind of acts like the your work page. It just gives you recent things that you've accessed from boards, projects, filters, or even recently viewed issues. Now you can start a brand new search, or you can even just go to all the issues or boards, projects, so on and so forth. The notification icon here gives you all the notifications that are relevant to you, or especially issues that you might be watching. Right beside that, you've got a help icon, which provides a couple of handy help links that I do recommend you checking out on your own time. And then right beside that, we've got a cogwheel, which gives you access to the administration section of Jira. Now, I am logged in as an administrator, which is why I can see all these options for Atlasian admin, Jira settings. But if you are just a developer or a user that is not an admin, then you would probably only see these two options, the Atlasian account settings and your personal Jira settings. And finally, on the right, we've got the profile icon. And this is, again, another place where you can access your personal settings, your profile, or account settings. Now, keep in mind that the account settings takes you to your Atlasian account settings, which is up one level because you have an Atlasian account. And under that account, you can create as many instances as you want, Jira Cloud instances. So this would take you to that upper level Atlasian account settings page. The profile, you will see, basically just takes you back to the people section and is your profile under that. So if I were to click on people, you can see that your user, is listed here as one of the people, as one of the team members. And by clicking on that, you can go in and you can update your profile. And this is what you would use to create teams and then add different profiles to the respective teams. And then there was also personal settings. So through this, you can change things like your time zone, your language, specify what kind of issues, what kind of emails you would like to get. And below that, we have something called Jira Labs. Now, Atlasian is trying out a new Jira issue view, and I have kept it enabled by default, and I would suggest you to do the same. Because chances are Atlasian wants to make that new issue view a permanent thing. So let's keep that enabled for now. All right, so that is a quick rundown of the navigation bar. Now, what are two of the most important things that make up Jira? Projects and issues. So let's take a closer look at project and issue navigation in the next couple of videos. Hey guys, welcome back. In the last video, we took our first look at the Jira user interface, mainly the navigation bar at the top. Now, let's take a closer look at projects and navigating the pages under a project. We've already taken a look at this page at a high level, which lists out all your projects. You've got your project name, the unique project key, which is basically used to create your unique issue key. So for example, the first issue created in the sample Scrum project would have the unique key as SSP-1. And then the second issue created would be SSP-2, so on and so forth. Both of these projects are classic software project types. And you will see that there is also another type called Next Gen Project, which we'll look at in a couple of sections. The user that created the project is usually set as the project lead, and at the right I can access the project settings because I am logged in as an administrator. And of course at the top right we have the Create Project button. Now I can see this here once again because I am an admin and I have the relevant global permissions. If you do not see the Create Project button, it probably means that you don't have the relevant permission to administer Jira. All right, let's go into one of the projects. Okay, so we are now in the project, but you can see that the main navigation bar is still accessible from anywhere. And on the left here, we have a vertical sub-navigation panel to navigate your way through the various pages that are under this project. So at the top, it tells you what project you're under. And then below that, you've got a board switcher. So keep in mind that you can create and have multiple boards under a single project. So if you do, then this is how you can switch between the different boards. And you can also access other boards that are part of other projects. So if I were to click on this, you will see that it will switch the project out on me. And so now we are in the My First project. So let's just switch back. All right, so moving down the list, we've got our backlog and active sprint view, which we will look at in more detail. And below that, we've got our reports. So when I click on that, it takes me down one level to the report section. And the reports available includes things like burn down chart, sprint report. There's a whole bunch available that we will explore later on. The releases page represents your software releases or versions. This is where you would go and create your versions for your project, which again is the same thing as a software release. So in this sample project, Jira created 3 versions already. 2 of them are unreleased and 1 of them already released. Just some sample data for you to play around with. The Issues and Filters section gives you a bunch of default filters that exist for your project. So currently I am looking at all the open issues under that project. I can switch that filter and look at all the issues that were created by me in this project, so on and so forth. So in summary, this is like your issue navigator within the project. The Pages section allows you to attach Confluence pages to the project. So if you are using Confluence, and you have a whole bunch of pages there that would make sense to attach or affiliate to the project, you can do so here. Components allows you to create subsections of a project. For example, front end or back end, and then you can assign issues to the respective components, kind of like categorizing your issues. And of course, we will look at this in more detail later on as well. Below that, you can add an item. So if you have handy links that you'd like your team members to have easy access to, you can add them here. You can even add a link to a repository here if you want. And finally, we have the project settings, which we will look at in a couple of sections in more detail. And I can see this option here because I am an administrator. So keep in mind that if you do not see the project settings option, you are probably not logged in as the administrator. And the last thing I wanted to point out is you can expand this sidebar or even collapse it altogether, just so you can maximize the main content area. And then if you move your cursor to the left side, you can see that that sidebar pops out, and then when you move your cursor away, it shrinks again. Okay, so we've taken an introductory look at the navigation bar at the top, as well as navigating within a project. Now the next step would be to look at the Issue Navigator and take our first dive into issues. We are now going to take a look at the Issue Navigator. I'm going to start off again from the home page. Now there are multiple ways I can get to the Issue Navigator, which is essentially the page on which you search for issues. I can either come up here to the Filters dropdown and click on Advanced Issue Search, or I can go to the search bar and click on the same thing there, or even go to the bottom and click on Go to All Issues. So this is your Issue Navigator page. You have a list of your issues, and this list that's displayed here is controlled by whatever filters you have enabled up here. And as you select the issue, the corresponding issue details appears in this panel section on the right side. Right now, it is showing all issues from all projects, all issue types, and all statuses. So if I want to go and filter in, let's say I only want to see the sample Scrum project issues, I can select that, and then it will only display the SSP issues. And then I can go in and I can save that as a filter so I can easily access this search as a shortcut through that filter. You've got these different filtering options available here, but you have a lot more when you click on More. You can even search for text in the issues, and you can even switch to JQL, the Jira query language. And don't worry about this right now. We will take a look at filters and JQL for advanced searching in a few videos coming up soon. Another thing I wanted to bring to your attention is that right now I am just doing a basic search. Below that, you can see that I have a filter that's starred, and if I click on that, you can see the name of the filter appearing at the top, and it is essentially the exact same as what I had before, which is just displaying all the issues in the sample Scrum project. Now notice here that Jira comes with some default filters already created for you. So for example, if I click on Open Issues, it displays all issues from all projects, but it's only displaying the ones where the resolution field is set to unresolved, which is basically implying that the issue is still open, it's not resolved. Similarly, Reported by Me uses the reporter field set to the current user that is logged in. So definitely feel free to take advantage of these predefined filters that comes with Jira. Now on the top right here, you can star this filter. You can export it to either Excel or Google Sheets. You can share the filter with your team members, or you can export it into various different formats. And then finally, you have the ability to bulk change all the issues that are displayed in this result set. You can also change the way this Navigator displays issues. So currently, as we click on an issue, the details appears over here, and this is called the detail view. You can also view this in a list format where the details are displayed in columns, and you can then specify which columns you want to see. Now, one scenario where I prefer this view over the detail view is if I want to export this list. Then what I can do is select the columns that I want displayed and then come up here and export to CSV current fields. So that will only include the columns that I have displayed here. But normally I just prefer to use the detail view just because I can see more information as I scroll through the issues one by one. Now, another quick note on this issue navigator, I came to this page from the top navigation bar. So I guess you could call this your Jira issue navigator page. But if you recall, in the previous video, we saw that projects also had its own issues and filters section. So let's also take a look at that. What I'm going to do is I will open up the sample Scrum project in its own tab. And since we're here, notice that I can expand the width of this issue list column. I also see the filtering options here, as well as all these other functions at the top right. Now, if I go to the SSP project, and let's take a look at the issues and filters section. Notice here that I cannot adjust this column width. I do not have those filtering options, and I also do not have those features on the top right. This is because I am within the project, so it is already filtering for all issues only within that sample Scrum project. So here, if I select Open Issues or Reported by Me, it's only taking into account issues in that project, and you're not able to do any additional filtering. So just keep that in mind going forward, that if you're on this page and you notice that these filtering options aren't there, all you have to do is click on the advanced search link here, and that will take us out of the project issue navigator into the bigger Jira navigator that encompasses all the projects. Now, because I'm coming out of the project, it already selected the sample Scrum project for me with the reporter as the current user, because when I was in the project, I was looking at all the issues that were reported by me in that project. So it just kept the same filters, but it took us out of that project navigator into the main issue navigator so I can continue and filter by more options. All right, we've taken a look at the issue navigator. Now let's take a dive into an individual issue and look at all these things that make up an issue. In this video, we will walk through all details of an issue. Now, before I begin, I just wanted to point out that I have logged out of the administrator account and logged back in as a regular developer account without admin privileges. The purpose of doing that is because this section of the course is for anyone working within an Agile team, such as a developer, QA team member, and so on. So I've created this new user called KS Developer and I've logged in through this account. And you can see here, if I click on the cogwheel, that I don't see those Jira setting options anymore. And it says here that I do not have access to Jira settings or Atlassian admin. Okay, so we want to look at details of an issue. So let me go back to the Issue Navigator page. So these are the details. Now, I kind of want to maximize the amount of real estate on my screen for this. So what I'm going to do is I can actually click on this issue key, and that's going to pop that open in its own tab. And I'm out of the Issue Navigator, so I don't have those controls, and I can see the issue details a lot better. Okay, starting from the top, we can see that we are in the sample Scrum project, and this is the issue key. So this is the 14th issue that was created in this project. And this little icon here tells me what the issue type is. And I can see that this is a story. Now below that, we've got the summary or title of the issue. And I'm sure you're familiar with this concept. If you have used ticketing systems in the past, you're familiar that these tickets come with a summary and a description. So this is the summary of your ticket, and then right below that, you've got your description, which happens to be in a wiki editor format. So you can go in and you can do some formatting, which is nice to have when it comes to putting in details of a ticket. Now in between that, we have a couple of buttons. So we can put in attachments to this ticket. We can even create subtasks under that ticket. So let me show you what that looks like. If I go back to the Issue Navigator, so this is a subtask, and I know that based on this little icon over here, because I know that that is a subtask. And so I see that this subtask is under the SSP10 issue. So if I click on that, this is what it would look like. The subtask would appear here, and looks like this particular story has two subtasks. So coming back to my issue, you can even link other issues to this issue. And if I click on this, you can also add a web link to the issue. So what does that look like? If I click on this, I have the ability to specify that there are other issues that are blocking, or this issue is blocked by, or it's cloned by, duplicated, or just, flat out relates to another issue. So let me just pick that one for example purposes and click link. So now you can see that those issues are linked. And now if I go to that SSP5 issue, here you will see the same thing, that it's linked to SSP14. All right, let me go back. Below this, we have our activity section. So we've got a list of comments, which is fairly self-explanatory. If you want to add a comment, I can come in and say test comment, click save, and then it appears there at the bottom. Now, as I hover over each comment, you can see this little thing that pops up, which allows you to copy a link directly to this comment. So, if you ever have an issue that's got tens and, maybe even hundreds of comments, God forbid that ever happened, but if you wanted to find one key comment, now you can go find it and then link directly to it. And comments also come with that wiki editor. And then you've got your history, which is basically a historic trail of all the updates that happened to the issue. And then you've got your work log. So as team members start coming in and logging time against this issue, all those work log entries would appear over here. Now coming back to the top, this is your status, which basically tells you what step in the workflow the issue is in. And when I clicked on it, I can see that I can transition this issue to either in progress or done. And if we look at the workflow, it'll give us more details. So there are only 3 statuses configured for this workflow, and we can see that any status can transition to any other status. And that's kind of what this all with the arrow going in represents. All right, moving on, we've got the assignee field, which I can edit right on the screen, and I can assign this issue to myself as the developer. It tells me who the reporter or the creator of this issue is. I can go in and I can put in labels. So labels are a means for you to group or categorize issues. So let's say there are a set of issues that all have one characteristic in common. You can create a label to represent that and then assign all issues to that label. Let's just say, for example purposes, that this particular ticket is a maintenance ticket. So I can just type that out and then I can create that as a label, and then going forward I can add this label to other issues as well. Okay, so below that we've got our story points estimate. It tells us what sprint the issue is under, as well as the priority of the issue. And then below that, I can expand out to see more fields that I can configure but aren't currently set. So in addition to the story points, you can also provide an estimate in the form of hours. So let's just say that this ticket we feel is going to take about 4 hours. And then under the time tracking, when I click on this, it says currently no time logged. But when I click on it, it'll give me this pop-up. And as a developer, I can say I've spent, let's say, 1 hour on it. It automatically updates the time remaining to 3 hours, add some other information. You can put in a work log description and then click save. And then now you can see an hour was logged, and it kind of burns down up until the total 4 hours that are required. And then this work log entry also shows up over here as we discussed. Now you've got some other fields like the epic link. So if this story were to get added to an epic, then that epic link would appear here. You can add a component to this issue, or you can even specify what the fixed version is. Now, the fixed version represents what software release the issue will be going out in. Now, keep in mind that if you are seeing a whole bunch of different other fields in your instance, or some of these fields aren't visible to you, it really depends on how your screen has been configured by your administrator and what fields have values. Because if a field does not have a value, then it may not appear here and you would have to expand it out to find it. Okay, so coming back to the top here, this little eye icon represents whether you are watching this issue or not. Now, watchers represent all the people that wish to be notified when the issue gets updated. They are basically watching the issue. Now, it looks like this developer is already watching this issue, and I may have come in before this recording and done that, but I can come in here and I can stop watching it. Now, I, as the developer, do not have the ability to set other users as watchers, but that is a permission level that can be assigned. So if I were logged in as an administrator or a project manager that did have that permission, then they can go in and they can add other people as watchers on any given ticket. I can also share this ticket with team members, and if I click on the ellipsis, I have a whole bunch of other functions. So log work would open up that same window that we looked at before. I can add a flag. So this is basically just a binary variable. So let's just say that you and your team can come up with a definition of what a flagged issue means. And then once you come to that definition and consensus, you can come in and then you can add a flag to say that, okay, this issue is flagged, and then you can remove that flag. So it's just an extra feature that you can take advantage of. You can convert this issue to a subtask. You can move it to another project. You can clone, which basically just copies the issue and creates a new one. And a lot of these are fairly self-explanatory. Now, I wanted to take a quick moment to point out this stuff here. Like I mentioned earlier in the course, Atlassian is trying out this new Jira issue view. So you have the ability to turn it off. And by clicking this, it's going to take you to your personal Jira settings page where you would have to go in and disable the labs option. But I would recommend keeping it on because I feel Jira will eventually want to make this view the permanent view going forward. But just for curiosity's sake, I want to point out a couple of differences. And up here you can also see that they're updating the view, and we can learn more about it. And so if I visit that link, you can see some of these updates. For example, the direct link to comments was published only recently. So you can kind of keep track and follow along, and I've provided this link in the resource section of this video. But you can also see what the old view looked like. So if I click on that and open it up in a new tab, so this is what the old issue view looks like. Right off the bat, it seems like it gives you a little more information, and that is kind of true. But I'm sure that Atlassian is working to give you that same information in the new view as well. So one of those features I want to point out is this voting feature. So let's say you're using a project to track new feature requests. You can actually create those feature requests as issues, and then you can ask your team to go in and vote for the ones that they like the most. And then you can make your development decisions based on that. But this voting feature is not available in the new view. But if I go back to this link, you can see that there is a Jira Cloud ticket that's open with Atlassian, and on that ticket they've got a list of work that's still pending. So if I just look for vote, you can see users can't vote in the new issue view, and this is a ticket that's currently open. So I'm hoping that Atlassian eventually puts that in place and just makes this new issue view that much better. All right, I think we've covered everything on the issue details. There's a lot of information here and functions available, but I think the more you play around with it and the more you view issues, the more you'll get used to it. All right, so far we've looked at the Jira user interface, we've looked at pages that exist within a project, the issue navigator, as well as the issue details. Now, as a team member, your goal would be to actually work on issues, right? And one of the places you could be doing that is on the Agile board itself. So let's now take a look at the Agile boards and how you can work on issues on the board. Hey guys, welcome back. So as a team member working within an Agile team, we've taken a look at projects and issues. Now let's take a look at the Agile boards created within projects and see how you can update issues on the boards. So what I'm going to do is I will click on the search bar and let's go to the All Boards page. Alright, looks like we've got two boards. And so basically, whenever you create a new Agile project or software project, an Agile board is created for it as well. And the kind of board depends on the kind of project template that you used, whether Scrum or Kanban. In this case, both projects happen to be of the Scrum template. There are three different types of boards that you can create: Scrum or Kanban, and also a next-gen board. This is only for next-gen projects, which we will take a look at later on, but is basically a simplified version of an Agile board with flexibility of turning it into either Scrum or Kanban. You can basically enable and disable whatever functionality you want from either Scrum or Kanban methodology in a next-gen board. Now, let me clarify some urban myths. Boards and projects are not a one-to-one relationship. If you recall in a recent video, I mentioned that projects can have multiple boards, and you can easily switch to them using the board switcher while you're in the project. A project is where you create issues, and a board is just a means of visualizing those issues. A board doesn't have to only display issues from one single project either. You can set it up to show whatever you want. It could be issues from multiple projects. But each board has to live within one single project, even if it's displaying issues from other projects. And that is what this location is implying. So this is telling me that the MFP board resides within the My First project, and the SSP board resides in the Sample Scrum project. And I can also show you quickly, if I were to create a new board, so let's just pick a Kanban, and you can see that I can create a board from an existing project, and I'd put in the board name, but here I can actually select multiple projects. So the board would display issues from both these projects, but the location can only be one project. So I would have to specify what project this board is going to live under. So I'll just cancel out of this now because we will look at that in some upcoming videos in the course. Alright, so in summary, a project can have multiple boards living within it, but a board can only live in one single project. And you can access it from that project or from this All Boards page. And a board can display issues from multiple projects. Now, if this is confusing, it will make more sense as you continue with the course. Okay, now let's dive into a board and take a look at it. Okay, you can see that we are in the sample Scrum project again, and it took me straight into the sprint view. Now, this is because Jira created a sample sprint for this project that happens to be currently ongoing and populated it with a bunch of issues. And each of these cards over here represent those issues that are part of the sprint. Now, when I click on any one of these issues, I get a pop-up that gives me those details. Now, I'm not a big fan of having this pop-up. In fact, what you can do is have the details pop up in a sidebar, or just display in a sidebar. So when I select that, now as I select the issue, those details appear here on the side, and I can maximize that area at the cost of minimizing the board space, of course, but that's really a good option to have depending on what you want. Now, I find this super convenient because technically you never have to leave the board. As you are working on a sprint, any issue that you click on, the corresponding details show up here, and all of these are editable. So you can come in there, you can update the description, you can scroll down, you can add some comments. So pretty much anything can be done right from this page itself. And if you look at each card, it gives you some consolidated information at a bird's eye level. So you've got the summary of the task or the issue. You've got this icon on the bottom left that tells you what issue type it is. So these two are subtasks. This is a bug, and looks like there are a couple of stories and a bug here in the done column. And then the arrow beside that is the priority, and it will display a different color or different looking arrow depending on what the priority is. Looks like all of these are medium priority. And then on the right side, you have the issue key and the assignee if the issue is assigned to a user. So that is how your issues are represented as cards on the board. Now, if I come up here to the top, we have our board name. We can even search for text or issues in the sprint. So let's see, is SSP-14 in the sprint? Yes, it is, and it's marked as done. You can also see all the assignees in the board, and this acts as a filter. So if I were to click on this, it would filter for all the issues assigned to that user. And you can select multiple users, and it just updates it accordingly, or unselect it to go back to everything. There's another filtering option for only my issues. So I am logged in as the developer, so it would only display issues assigned to that user, and you can also see recently updated issues. And then coming up here to the top right, you can star the board. It tells you how many days remaining in the sprint. Clearly we're overdue, and that's probably I created this sample project a lot longer ago, and it's past that point where the sprint should be completed. This is how you can complete a sprint, and we will look at that in the Leading an Agile Team section. You can share this board, and you've got a couple of other functions such as board settings, which we will also look at later on. Alright, now let's get to actually doing some work. Let's say I'm logged in as the developer, and let's say I want to work on an issue. So the first thing I'll probably do is filter for all the issues assigned to myself. Right now it looks like the only issue assigned to me is already complete. So let me undo that. And let's take a look at this bug over here. So it's currently assigned to the administrator. What I can do is I can come in and I can assign that to myself. And now I can start work on it. So the first thing I would need to do is currently it's in the to-do column, right? So if I start working on it, that means it's in progress. So I would need to update the status. and I can do that by clicking and dragging that into the in progress column. Now, before I do that, let me talk about these columns. You can see here that we have 3 columns. But if you recall, in the workflow, we also had 3 statuses. So let's take a look at that again. I can find the workflow by going into the status dropdown and clicking View Workflow. So like we saw before, there are 3 statuses: to do, in progress, done. And technically, done should be below in progress if you want to keep it in sequential order, but it doesn't really matter because we can transition from any status to any other status. So we've got 3 statuses, and coincidentally we have 3 columns: to do, in progress, and done. So it looks like this board has been configured where each column is mapped to the respective status. That may not always be the case. You can also have boards where one column gets mapped to multiple different statuses, and that's something we will look at later on when we're configuring the Agile boards. But for now, it looks like there's a one-to-one mapping, and I can transition from any status to any other status. That is why when I click and drag this, both these columns highlight, which is telling me that I can move it into any one of these. But let's just start work and move it to the in progress column. So I think there's a little bit of a bug with Jira right now where when I click and drag to another column, the status doesn't really update right away. You kind of have to either refresh the page or click on another issue and then click back at the one you want. And now you can see that the status updated to in progress. All right, so let's say I finished the work for this and I want to mark it as done. So once again, I can click and drag and you can see I can move it to either of the columns, but let's move it to the done column. And just keep in mind this is SSP-13. So when I drop it, now you can see SSP-13 it has a strike through, which means that the resolution has been set. But again, the status hasn't updated, but if I just click out and go back, there you go. Now the status is done, and you can see that it has a resolution of done, which is why it had a strike through. Now I can also move it out of the done column back into any of the other columns. And keep in mind that this may not always be the case. You might have restrictions on transitions where, some transitions aren't allowed. So depending on what transition is allowed, that respective column would end up highlighting. So for example, if I am not allowed to transition from done to the to-do column, then when I click and drag, this column wouldn't end up highlighting. It would only be this in progress column, which is telling me that I can only make that transition. So if I do that and I drop it into in progress, also notice that the SSP-13 is no longer struck through. And that's because, as I mentioned in the previous video, this is something that has to be configured with the workflow. And that's already done for us over here behind the scenes. So in summary, the workflow is set up so that if I move a status to the done column, it sets the resolution, and when I move it out, it unsets the resolution, so that's why the strike through is removed. So this is how developers can work on issues, look at details of an issue on the board, and they can update statuses by moving issues from left to right, depending on the transitions that are allowed for that workflow. And this is the overall sprint view. In the next video, let's take a look at the backlog view, because that is essentially what the product managers would groom, and you as the developer can see and understand what kind of work is coming up next in terms of the development pipeline. Let's head over to the backlog. Alright, so this is the backlog view of our SSP board. You can see that it's split up between sprints at the top and then your backlog at the bottom. This is the sprint that is currently running, which we were also looking at in the previous video through the sprint view, except here the issues are arranged in a list format. At the top here you've got the sprint name. It tells you how many issues are part of the sprint. You have the start and end dates of the sprint. As we saw, we were clearly overdue on completing it. You have the users that are in the sprint, and you can also see a work allocation breakdown on a per user basis. And then below that, we have the issues. So once again, you've got the icon that represents what the issue type is. You have the summary of the issue, what version it belongs to, and we will take a look at that in a couple minutes. The assignee of the issue, and then the issue key, and this being struck through tells me that it's already resolved. You've got the priority, and you've got your story point estimates. And once again, if I click on any of the issues, the corresponding details show up on the right side over here. Now let's scroll down and look at the backlog. So we can see here that there are 8 issues in the backlog. And if I was the product manager, I can start prepping for the next sprint. So keeping in mind that this one is currently ongoing, I can come here and click Create Sprint. So that basically just increments the number here and creates another sample sprint. And I can start populating this with issues from the backlog just as a means of preparing for what we may work on in the next sprint. I can drag issues into the sprint, or I can also drag them in and around the backlog itself, thereby just ensuring that I am constantly grooming the backlog and making sure that the most important issues are at the top and have all the relevant information and details needed for the team to start working on it in the next sprint. Essentially, the product manager basically just lives and breathes on this backlog view, just ensuring that the development pipeline is always fulfilled. Now you can see that some of these issues have already been assigned to a version. So let's take a look at that. If I go up here to the left side, you can see epics and versions. When I click on epics, it opens that up in a new column, and the same thing when I click on versions. And so here we've got a list of all the unreleased versions so far. And once again, you can create your versions in the releases section of the project, and then they would appear over here. So let me minimize this just to expand the space. So once again, versions represent your software releases. And once you create them, you can specify which issues you would like to release in each version. You can expand it out, and it'll give you the details such as your targeted release date, how many issues are in there, how many are completed, the total estimate, and what the progress is. And if I click on this version, it basically acts as a filter. So now it's only displaying the issues that are part of that version. And if I select it again, it'll basically reset that, or I can just go in and click on all issues to display all the issues on the backlog view. I can also assign issues to versions from this view. So let's just say, for example purposes, that SSP-6 is an issue that I would like to release in version 3.0. So what I can do is I can click and drag this directly into version 3. And you can see it gets highlighted by a green box. So if I do that and then release it, so now you see SSP-6 is in version 3. And let's say I want to unassign SSP3 from version 3 because I decide I don't want to release it anymore. I can also click and drag that one into the issues without versions, as you can see here. And then that will remove it from version 3.0. Alright, so that's a look at the versions. Now in terms of the epics, this column is where all the epics in the project would be displayed. Now currently in this sample project, there are no epics, but we will be creating them later on in the course. At the top, you've got the same filters. You can search for issues, you can filter by assignees, or only look at your issues, recently updated, basically the same filtering options that we had in the sprint view. Now, one thing I did skip over is for this sprint, on the right side, you do have the ability to edit the sprint, which is basically the name and the start and end date of the sprint. You can plan the sprint by attaching Confluence pages to it. So if you were using Confluence, that's something you can take advantage of. And then here you have a summary of your story point estimates. And it is kind of organized in the form of status categories, which is to do, in progress, and done. So we can see that there are 9 story points that have been completed and 5 story points that are in progress. And if you hover your mouse over it, kind of tells you that. 5 of 14 story points in progress. And it looks like those 5 story points are part of this SSP10 issue. So let's switch back to the sprint view and do another quick demo. So here, SSP10 is actually a story, and that story has 2 subtasks under it. And that's another thing to note. Subtasks get displayed in the sprint view, but they do not get displayed in the backlog view. And while both these subtasks are in progress, so is the story, but the story kind of encompasses the entire span of the board, or I guess the sprint view, and I can minimize it if I want to hide the subtasks, or see them if I want to individually update them. So let's just try moving both the subtasks to the done column, thereby marking them as result, and you get a pop-up which says that all subtasks for the parent issue are now done, so do you want to update the parent issue to match it? So that makes sense. Let's go ahead and do that. And now you can see SSP10 is marked as done and it is struck through. So now if we go back to the backlog view, you can see that all the story points are completed and there is nothing in progress or pending in the to-do state. So technically we can go ahead and we could complete the sprint. But completing the sprint is something that probably the product manager would do, so we will look at that in the leading Agile section. Alright, so this has been a walkthrough of a Scrum-based project since we looked at the sprint view as well as the backlog view. Now let's switch gears to a Kanban-based project and look at a Kanban board. Alright, I am back in the boards page, and we took a look at the SSP Scrum-based board. It looks like I don't have a Kanban board to play with, so I need to create one, and it needs to have sample data. We saw how to do this in the introductory section of the course, so let's take a look at that again. I am logged in as the developer, so if I try to create a board, I get the options of Scrum in Kanban. However, I do not see the options of creating a board with sample data. If you recall, only the administrator can do that. So what I need to do is I need to log out of this account and log back in as the administrator. So let me go ahead and do that. Alright, here I am as the administrator, and it looks like I have a couple of notifications. Well, look at that. Looks like the developer has been a very busy bee. So that's good to see. Now, if I create a board, I do see those options to create a board with sample data. So I want Kanban, so I'll go ahead and click on this. I am okay with the sample Kanban project name. I'm okay with the key and the project lead. Keep in mind that while this is creating a board, Jira also creates a corresponding project because every board needs to live within a project, so it's going to create a Kanban project for me as well. So I'll go ahead and select Create Board. And I'm taken right into the Kanban board. And as you can see, there's already a bunch of data populated in here. So let me now switch back to the developer account. Okay, I am back as the developer, so let's head back to the boards page. And now we can see the SKP board created for the sample Kanban project. So let's go into it and take a look at what we have. So right off the bat, you can see that this Kanban board looks very similar to a Scrum board. However, on the left side under the project navigation, you can see that there is no backlog or sprint view. We just have one Kanban board and one single view to represent the board. However, stay tuned because in the next section of the course, we will see how you might be able to have a backlog for Kanban boards as well. But no need to worry about that right now. Okay, so with respect to Kanban, if you recall, the goal of a Kanban project is to visualize the work and to ensure that there is a smooth flow of work from left to right. And you can see here that this in progress column is highlighted in red, and that is because there has been a work in progress limit that has been configured for the column. And you can see that up here where it says max 1, implying that only one issue is allowed to be in this column at any point in time. In this case, we have 2 issues. So the column gets highlighted and kind of alerts the team that there's something going on here and you need to kind of fix that and make sure there's only one item in progress. And you can set your work in progress limits for any of these columns. Just really depends on what your team wants. So very similar to the Scrum Board, a developer is able to click and drag an issue to another column to move it along the workflow. But again, depending on the transitions that are allowed in the workflow. So let's take a look at the workflow for this project. So if I click on an issue, once again the details appear on the right, and I can click on the status dropdown and view workflow. So it looks like we've got 4 statuses: backlog, selected for dev, in progress, and done. And once again, we can transition from any status to any other status. All right, so we've got 4 statuses, and once again, we have 4 columns. So conveniently, it looks like the columns have been mapped to their own respective status here as well. So I can take one of these issues, so let's take the SKP-7 issue, and let's mark it as done. So once again, it gets struck through, implying that the resolution was set. So let me just click out of that and back into there so that I can see the updated status, and the resolution was set to done. Now, for some reason, the other sample data issues that were already in the done column, it looks like the resolution wasn't set for them. So if you want to do that, you can probably just drag it out of the column and back in, and that should set the resolution and strike it through. And you might have also noticed that because we only have one issue in this column, that red highlight has gone because we are now satisfying the constraint. All right, so this is a summary and a quick look at the Kanban board. And you can see it's very similar to the Scrum board. It's just a matter of updating the issues and ensuring that work flows smoothly across the board while satisfying the column constraints. And obviously, things are not time-gapped in the form of sprints. Hey guys, welcome back. Hopefully the course has been easy to follow so far, especially if you're brand new to Jira. We are going to continue from a team member's point of view, and another very frequent function you might have to do would be to create issues. There are many ways in Jira through which you can create issues. I would say the go-to approach would be to just click on the Create button at the top here, which can be accessed from anywhere. It doesn't matter what page you're on. Or you can just simply use the letter C on your keyboard. So when I type C, I get that Create Issue screen. We've seen the Issue Details screen in previous videos, which is commonly referred to as the View Issue screen. So this would be the Create Issue screen. And once again, you can see the familiar fields that you would need to fill out to enter in the details of the issue or ticket that you're creating. The fields that appear here can vary because it can be customized. So what you see will depend on what has been configured by the Jira administrator for this particular project and this particular issue type. Another thing I want to point out is, let's say you create a lot of issues, and when you see this Create Issue screen, there are a lot of fields in there. But let's say you're only updating only a handful of them every time you create an issue. Well, you can customize that yourself. If you go up here to the Configure Fields dropdown, right now it's showing all the fields that are being displayed on the screen. But you can click on Custom, and then you can uncheck some of these fields that you don't want. So for example, if I don't want the description, I can uncheck it. So you saw the description field went away, but it looks like there's a small UI bug here where the tick is still there. So even though it's actually unchecked, it's showing me that it's still checked. So hopefully Jira gets on that and fixes that soon, but it's only a minor glitch. So let's say I want the assignee field. I can keep the priority. I'm going to put description back in there because it's important. but then you can uncheck all the other ones, and then you can view the screen just to make sure that the correct ones are there, and those are the ones that you want. So that's an option as well. And like I said, the fields that display here depend and can change depending on the project you select, as well as the issue type. So let me actually demo that. Right now, you can see summary, components, description, assignee, and priority. And the issue type selected is story. So let's switch that to epic. Now you can see this new epic name field. And what this represents is it's basically just a name that you can use to identify your epics easily. And we noticed in the previous videos that we don't have any epics created for the sample Scrum project, so let's actually go ahead and create one. So I'll call this sample epic, and for the summary I'll just say larger body of work. I'll leave the components and description I can just put in test for now, and I'll leave the rest as is. And before I create it, I'm going to select this create another checkbox. So what that will do is once I click create, you can see that that issue got created. So I'll just pop that open in its own tab. And you can see the issue details screen looks exactly like any other issue we have seen, except that this is an epic. It's in the sample Scrum project. Here you've got the summary and the remaining details. Now the epic name is showing up here on the bottom right, and in just a bit I will show you the benefit of having this epic name. So let's go back. So because I had selected this checkbox, it created the issue, but it kept the form active so I can continue creating more issues. So let's now create a story. And I'm going to put this story in the epic that I just created. So for the summary, I'll just say as a user, I'd like to create a story to add to epic. Okay. Description I can put in test again. Now you can see I don't have any fields that allows me to add this issue, this story, under the epic that I just created. But I have this customized. So let me go back to viewing all the fields. So now as I select story, if I scroll down, you will see epic link as one of the fields that was there. And I can go in and now I can find the epic that I just created and specify that to be the epic link, which means that this story will be created under that epic. So let me uncheck this and hit create. So because I had the sample Scrum project selected, obviously it created that issue under the sample Scrum project. And now you can see that the issue we created is right here. It has been assigned to the sample epic. So if I come in here and click on epics to open up the column, the epic shows up here as well. And this is where that epic name comes in handy, because you can see the summary of the issue can tend to be pretty long. So if it was here as the summary, you may not be able to figure out which epic that is. So having that epic name and keeping it short and concise lets you easily identify your epics. And then you can expand it and the summary appears below that, and it tells you some details like how many issues are under it and what the progress and estimate and all those details are. And also if I click on the sample epic, it filters the board to only the issues that are under that epic. So there you go. We've created our first issue, which happened to be an epic, and then we created a story underneath that epic. Now, another way that you can create issues, which I think is rather convenient and handy, is you see this little plus with a create issue link here. If I select it, it actually lets me create issues really quickly through this way. You can also see that under sample sprint 3, which means that if you click on this and create an issue here, it will automatically get added to this sprint. You don't see that option under the sample sprint 2 because this is an active sprint. And Jira doesn't let you easily add issues to active sprints. There are ways that you can move issues into them, and that's something we'll look at in the next section of the course. But for now, let me just come down here, and the benefit of having this ability is that let's say you're really busy and you suddenly come up with an idea and you want to just document it and make sure something is in Jira, which you can come back to later on to put in the details. you can do that through this, and you want to put it into the backlog. So let's say this is a great idea and I want to revisit this later, but I just wanted to put it in there. I can type that out, hit enter, and there you go, the issue is created. And because I was filtering by the epic, it automatically added it to that epic. If I didn't want it in the epic, I can just click and drag that into the issues without epics box here, but I'll leave it as is. And then if I want to unfilter and view all the issues again, I can just click on all issues to bring me back, and you can see the 2 issues we created under the epic. Now let's maybe try to create another one under the sample sprint 3. And this time I can actually change what the issue type is here. So let's say I want to create a task, and let me just say this is a task, and I can hit enter. So now that task is automatically put under the next sprint. And if I want, I can again click and drag this into the sample epic, and then you can see it gets assigned and put under that epic. And the last thing I want to show you, let's just go back to the epic page. And if I refresh it, now the page lists out and includes all the issues that are under the epic, which happen to be the 3 issues that we just created. Now, 2 of those issues that we created, we did so quickly by coming in here and just typing out the summary. So now coming back to it, we can always click on it, look at the details, and fill in the remaining information like the description. We can assign it to someone, or update the priority, put in some comments, things like that. So it's a really handy way of quickly creating issues you want. Or you can just use the main create issue screen if you have all the details handy and you just want to populate it as part of the same process. All right, so we've created some issues. Now let's take a look at how we can search for issues. I'm sure you guessed it, but the go-to place would be your search bar at the top. And we've seen this before, where it already lists out the recent issues that you've viewed. So on a day-to-day basis, if you're working on just a handful of issues, you might not need to go anywhere else to find or access them. But if you do want to do a more extensive search, or let's say you viewed an issue several days ago and it's not appearing in this most recent list, then you can just come down here and click on Go to All Issues. So that will take us to the Issue Navigator page, which we had seen before, and by default it will sort by your last viewed. And so you can scroll down more and find that issue that you may have accessed many days ago. So coming back here, we had touched on this briefly, but you have a few filtering options. You can filter the issues by project, or the issue type, or status, or even the assignee. You can even search for text within the issues, and then if you click on more, you've got a whole bunch of other fields, pretty much all the fields available in Jira to filter by. And as you select them, the recent ones that you used will appear here under the recent criteria. So as an example, let's maybe select the created date. So it lets me look for issues that have been created, let's say within the last 2 days, or even, you can select more than a few hours or days or weeks ago. You can select between a certain time period, many options to choose from here, as well as so many other fields to pick from. So I definitely recommend you going in here and trying it out for yourself. Now, another thing I want to point out is this thing that Jira calls smart querying. So if I come up here to the search bar and I just type the word my, what that does is it activates the smart querying feature, and it only displays issues that are assigned to me, as in the user that's logged in, basically my issues. And if you look at the filters, you can see that the assignee is set to the current user, which is the user that's logged in. So let's take a look at a couple of other examples. If I type a story here, that will return all the stories to me. So you can see now the issue type has stories selected by default through that smart query. So we just created an epic, so if I type in epic, we should expect to see the 1, and there it is. Now you can also do it by project, so if I type in SSP, we should expect that the sample Scrum project is selected, and there it is. Now similarly, if I come in here and I type SSP, and then a space, and then the word sample, and I activate that, so it will search in the Scrum project, but it will search for the word sample. So similarly, I can do SSP dash, or not dash, space story, and then that should return all the stories under the sample Scrum project. So these are just a few of the examples possible, and there are many other smart querying options that Atlassian has some pretty good documentation on. So I've provided a link in the resources and definitely recommend you trying some of them out. Alright, so that's a look at the basic searching capabilities. Now let's move on to some more advanced searching using JQL. Jira allows you to do searches by using the filtering options provided here. And they also allow you to do advanced searches using a query language which they call JQL, which stands for Jira Query Language. So let's take a look at that. Right now I have it filtered by the sample Scrum project. For only stories, let's pick in progress and to-do status. We'll leave the assignee, so right now we have about 9 issues being returned. If I go ahead and click on switch to JQL, you will see the same query laid out in a query language format. If you happen to be familiar with other query languages such as SQL or SQL, this would look quite familiar to you. So what it's basically saying is that the issue type equals story, and the project equals SSP, and the status is one of either in progress or to do. Now, I can type this out myself, and you will see that Jira actually helps me build the query together. So let me remove that and hit enter. So this is returning all the issues. You can see there's a total of 43 issues being returned. But let's say we want to get back those 9 issues. So I'll start off with a project. So if I just type out project, you can see that it starts suggesting what I can enter. And then if I hit space, now you can see the operators. So I'll select equals. And then once again, it will suggest the projects available. So let's go ahead and pick SSP. And I want the story issue type. So if I start typing issue type, you can see it suggests it. And then once again, equals. And then let's pick story. And we want the status. So let's go with status. Now I can do one of two things. I can either select equals, and then I can pick one status, or if I want multiple status, then instead of equals, let's go ahead and pick in, and then now you'd have to open up a bracket and then start typing out all the different statuses separated by commas. So let's go with in progress, and the next one we wanted was to do. And then close the bracket, hit enter, and there you go. We built the same query in JQL and it's returning those 9 issues. I can even switch back to basic and it's the exact same filters over here. Now let's try typing in that sample text again, and let's see, okay, it only returns 1 issue. And if I switch to JQL, you can see it added and text with a tilde sign equals sample in quotes. So by playing around with the filters available here and even selecting additional fields and then switching to JQL, you can see how Jira lays out that JQL and you can learn it that way. Now, what are the advantages of JQL? Well, in addition to having many advanced functions available in JQL, let me show you one more thing. Let me remove sample and let's go back to the previous query. Now let's say the workflow that your project is using is really extensive and it has a lot of statuses in there. Up to and above 10 or 15, even 20 different statuses. I mean, it's not uncommon to get to that point. You could have so many different things, multiple steps of review, documentation, dev review, QA review, so on and so forth. So let's say you've got 10 statuses, right? And all of them are, in progress or to do, and then you've got one final status at the end, which is your done status, right? And that marks a ticket as being done. Now, if you want to come in here and you want to see all the issues that are not done, you would have to go in and just like this, you would have to select each and every one of those statuses except the last one, which is done, and then you would be able to filter it that way. However, it would be a lot easier to do that in JQL, and let me show you how. So if I can switch to JQL, instead of saying status in all of them individually, I can just come in here and say status not equals done. And then it's going to give me the exact same results, and I was able to do it so easily as opposed to hand selecting each and every other status. And because this function or the ability to do something like this is not available in the basic filtering, you can see that switching to basic is now grayed out for me, and it says that the query is too complex to display in the simple mode. And just to show you that again, so if I just say status equals done, now I can switch to basic. The reason why is because it doesn't really give me an option to select all or unselect all statuses, so you have to manually do it. So that's one of the advantages of JQL. Let's try a couple more examples. So we created one epic. Let's look for that. So we want the issue type equals, if I type out E, it should suggest it, and then hit enter, and there you go, that's the one epic that we created. Let's try searching for these issues. So if we want to find all the issues that are under this particular epic, if you recall, when we created this first issue, we had to fill in the epic link field. So if I come in here, and let me just type epic, you can see these are the possible fields, and epic link is the one that I want, and then equals, and then it suggests the epics available. Right now we only have one. So when I select that and hit enter, now it returns the 3 issues that are under that epic. And here you can see I can switch to basic because it's basically taking one of those extra fields, epic link, and it's selecting it that way. So you can search for issues either using these predefined filtering options, or you can build your own query from scratch to maybe get something more specific or advanced that you couldn't with filters. Now, do you want to get really advanced? Jira has some pretty solid documentation on JQL, for which I've provided a link in the resources. And I want to actually take a moment and check it out with you right now. So I just opened up Atlasian's documentation on JQL functions in a different tab, and I wanted to just show you some of these as examples. You can see here that the documentation groups it into JQL functions, fields, keywords, operators, and some advanced stuff if you are using things like Bitbucket for code management. So if we take a look at the functions right off the top, some of these functions available in JQL, it mentions here that it's only applicable to Jira Service Desk. So if you are using Jira Service Desk, then these functions come with it. But let me scroll down here and let me find one that we can use. Okay, closed sprints. So this searches for issues that are assigned to a completed sprint. So if I come back here and let's get rid of this. Let's search for project equals SSP. And now I'm going to come back here and I'm going to copy this in the example, sprint enclosed sprints. Just going back here. So what this does is it returns all the issues that are part of a sprint that has been completed. So if I come in here and look at these issue details in the sprint field, you can see that it's part of sample sprint 1, which was already completed apparently on this date. So let's take a look. I recommend going through some of these functions and playing around with it. We've already seen current user before. So coming back here, if we go to JQL fields, this lists out all the fields that are available. So I won't go through that. Definitely feel free to peruse it yourself. Moving on to keywords. These are the keywords that we've been working with. You can use the and, or functions, or not. So yeah, again, ordering by, so that lets you sort the results by certain parameter, and it even gives you examples here. Now, in operators, there's something that I want to show you, which I think is kind of useful when you're searching for lots and lots of issues, especially when it comes to the history of an issue. So if I scroll down here, again, you can see the basic ones, like greater than, if you want to look for created dates, especially, or any date. But if I continue, what I want to find is was. So I think this is pretty nifty. The was operator is used to find issues that currently have or previously had the specified value for the specified field. And I think it is most useful when you're searching for things like statuses. So coming down to the examples, you can see status was in progress. So it finds all the issues that currently have or previously had a status of in progress. And you can even do things like issues that were resolved by a user before a certain date. So it's really comprehensive. Down here you can look for statuses, multiple statuses. So if an issue was in either resolved or closed. So a lot of things that are available here that I definitely recommend you coming in and familiarizing yourself with them, because you never know when it can come in handy. Now, there for sure will be things you might not be able to do in JQL, and I've found that anytime I want to search for something to see if it's possible, it's Google to the rescue. Normally, when I try to Google how to do something in JQL, I find a ton of links from the Atlasian community forum, because I'm sure that there's going to be many other people that have tried doing exactly what you're trying to do. So definitely try Google searching for what you're trying to do, and or just check out this documentation to see what's possible. Okay, so coming back to our Jira instance, if you've noticed yourself searching for issues and always running the same query over and over again, you're better off saving that as a filter, which is a good segue to talking about filters in our next video. So as I was saying, if you find yourself running the same search queries, you're better off saving that as a filter so you can save time going forward. So how would you do that? Right now, I've got a search query where I'm selecting the sample Scrum project, looking for stories that are in progress or to do. So basically all the incomplete stories. So what I can do now is I can come up here and click Save As, and then type in the name for my filter. So I'll just call this the SSP Incomplete Stories and hit Submit. And so now that's it. It's saved as a filter. And whenever you want to do the search again, you just need to access this filter, and you don't need to come in and manually select these options every time. You can find that filter is now created. In fact, it's showing up under your Start filters, and on the right side here you can see that the star is enabled by default. And that's because usually any filter you create will get starred as a favorite, because chances are if you are creating it, you want to use it frequently, so it adds it to your starred list by default. And we had seen this before as well, but in the navigation bar, we also have a menu option to access your filters from anywhere in Jira. It just goes to say that filters are such an important and useful concept that Jira put in a dedicated menu option to access them easily. And you can see the new filter is now showing up under Recent, and it is starred as well. Now you can come down and click on View All Filters to look at all the filters that you have access to. So these are the filters that Jira created for the respective boards, and here I have my custom made filter. Now notice that the access says private. So I'm logged in as the KS developer user, and this user is the only one that can access this filter. And that's how it behaves by default. So let's go back to the filter, and I can show you how you will open it up so that other users may access it as well. Right up top here beside the filter name, when you click on Details, you can see here that the filter is owned by the developer user, and down here under permissions, it says the filter is only visible to you. So keep that in mind going forward, that anytime you save a filter, you can't just copy the URL and then send it or share it with a team member. They would not be able to access it unless you adjust these permissions. So let's click on Edit Permissions. And keep in mind that is also how you can put in a description of the filter. Now here you can see it's set to private. And the options available are you can either share it with a project, so anyone that has access to the SSP project would also be able to access this filter. Or you can specify it as a group. Now the options available here are only the groups that this user is a part of. So if I were to go this route, then any user as part of this group would be able to access the filter. Or you can just specify the organization, which means that any user that's logged into that cloud instance would be able to access this filter. And always remember to hit add before hitting save, because if I were to click on save right now, nothing really changed. It's still set to only private. So I'll go ahead and click add. Now you can see it's set to be shared by the or with the entire organization. Now if I hit save, and now let me go back to the view all filters page, which I'll open up in a new tab. And you can see now that it's accessible by anyone in the organization. Okay, let's go back to the filter. There is one more thing I wanted to talk about. If you go back to the details, you can see here that there's something called subscriptions. Now, Jira allows you to subscribe to a filter where it will send you an email with the list of issues that get returned by that filter on a periodic basis. So here I can see that the recipients right now, it's set to personal subscription, which means that it's going to send me an email and no one else. I can select groups. Once again, the groups that would appear here are groups that the user is a part of. So let's just keep it as a personal subscription. And you can schedule it to either send you an email every day, or you can select individual days per week or per month. A lot of flexibility available here to work with. More often than not, I go with a daily subscription, and I usually leave this unchecked because I don't want the filter to send me an email when there are no issues in there. But that's always an option if you also want to see an email when there are no issues in that filter. And then you would go ahead and click subscribe. Now I think Atlassian can do a better job with this functionality because as of now, you are not able to create a filter subscription on behalf of other people. You can do it on behalf of groups, but you would have to be part of that group. So for instance, if you want to set up a subscription on behalf of your managers, where you want them to get emailed all the high priority tickets or all the bugs or all the urgent tickets, whatever the criteria is, you can create a group and you can add your managers to it. And we'll look at groups and all that stuff in the admin section of the course. But let's say you did that, you still wouldn't be able to see that option unless you yourself was in that group. So just keep that in mind. That's what would be required for doing that. Okay, let's cancel out of this. I just wanted to show you the capabilities and things that you can do with filters. The last thing to note is that the filter is owned by this user, which means it cannot be modified or edited by any other user. So if this user were to, for example, leave the organization, the administrator would need to log in, and there's a way to change the owner to someone else. And only then, once the owner is changed, then the new owner would be able to edit the filter. All right, so that's a look at filters. Save as many as you want and take advantage of this feature, whether private or if you want to share filters with your team. And for the really important issues you want to be looking at every day, set up a search to identify those issues, save it as a filter, and then set up a daily subscription so that the list gets sent to you in an email every day. All right. Let's now talk a little more about dashboards. Jira created a default dashboard for us as we had seen in one of the earlier videos. And you can access that by going here, clicking on View All Dashboards, and then selecting Default Dashboard. And we had seen that this dashboard had 4 gadgets that were put on it. Now, you can also create your own custom dashboard. So if you go to the dashboard dropdown again and select Create Dashboard, you can go in and put a name. So let's call this My Dashboard. You can put in a description, and you can specify if you want this to be private, so only you can access it. So it's a dashboard for you to always use and see your own data, whatever's relevant to you. Or you can share it with the organization as well if you think it would be helpful to your team members. So just for example purposes, I'll share it with the organization so any logged in user would be able to access it. And let's click Save. So it creates an empty dashboard, and now you can start building it from scratch. The first thing I want to point out is you can edit the layout. So right now it looks like it positions the layout in the form of 2 columns. You can change it so that it's only 1 column, or 2 columns where one is slightly wider than the other one, or you can just put in 3 columns. So let's just go with this for now. The next step would be to go in and start adding your gadgets. And you can either come in and click on one of these links here, or just at the top click on Add Gadget. Now you may see this where it says more gadgets available, so always remember to click on Load All Gadgets so that all the options appear. Now you can see there's a lot to choose from, and I'm not going to be able to go through each one of them, but I really recommend you going in and trying them out one at a time, or whichever ones look appealing to you, just to get that practice in seeing what is available and what Jira has to offer. So let's try to add in a few. So maybe we can add a chart. So if I go to the charts section, maybe we can throw on a pie chart, and then like I said, feel free to try some of the other ones out as well. Let's move on to Jira. I kind of like this Agile wallboard gadget because it basically allows us to put an Agile board on the dashboard. So let's select that one. We had already seen the Assigned to Me gadget. This is one that was added on the default dashboard. Let's see what else is available. I think filter results is very common, so I'm going to go ahead and add that. And in fact, you can come up here if you want to see, for example, all gadgets that are related to filter. You can just filter by the word filter. So I selected the filter results already. Maybe let's try the start filters, which is kind of self-explanatory. It just lists out the current user start filters. So we'll add that, and let's go with that for now. Okay, so it looks like it added all of them in one single column. But what I can do is I can now click at the top and drag them to another column just so I can even out the space. So maybe bring this one up here. I can bring it above that maybe. All right. So for the Agile wallboard gadget, now it's just a matter of configuring and setting up all the details for each of these. So the wallboard gadget, let's just go with the Kanban board. And yeah, sure, we can select the board name. I don't need to show the quick filter names. You can set a refresh interval to be every 15 minutes, let's say. Click Save, and there you go. Now you can't edit this board, so you can't click and drag issues. It is just a read-only view of the current state of this Agile board. Okay, so moving on to the filter results, we would need to pick a filter. So maybe we can pick the filter for SSP board. We can ask it to return, whatever number of results you want. Let's maybe add the status field to the results, and then update every 15 minutes. Click Save, and there you go. So that's a list of all the results returned from the filter for the SSP board. In the pie chart, once again, we can either pick a project or saved filter. So maybe if I type the sample, it'll recommend the project, so I can pick that. Or I could maybe do an advanced search, and here I can select a filter, or I can search for projects, or see what's popular. Let me cancel out of this for now, because we already selected our project. So this is a pie chart, so I want the statistic type to be based on assignee, but again, you have a lot to choose from. Let's go with assignee, and hit Save. And then finally, the start filters, you want it to show you the results. So yeah, I'll leave that by default and hit Save. And it's that easy. So we had the wallboard here we've got the filter results. We have a pie chart, so you can see around 55% of the issues are unassigned. And then below that, we really only have one filter that we start, so that's the one that's showing up here. But there you go. I just created a custom dashboard and I added some gadgets that cater to me. And as a user of Jira, you can do a lot more. And the world is essentially yours. You can take a look at all the gadgets available and can customize and position them according to whatever you would like to look at every time you log into Jira. Now, the last thing I wanted to show you is a pretty cool feature called Jira Wallboard. So you can see the option here, View as Wallboard. So if you click on this, Jira sets up almost like a slideshow, and they show all the different gadgets that you have on this dashboard. And the cool thing about this is you can connect this to a big screen. It could be a TV or a big monitor that you have set up in the room that the entire team can view and can visualize what's going on. So if there are any metrics that apply to the team that the team always kind of wants to monitor, you can set this up on the big screen so that the entire room is always updated on the status of that important metric that's relevant to them. So there you go. That's a more in-depth look at creating dashboards. I definitely recommend you going in and creating some for yourselves, playing around with gadgets, seeing what's available. As you never know, dashboards are almost like a reporting tool that can give you information that's relevant to you. And your managers might even be looking for something like that. So the more you familiarize yourself, the more you would be able to create things like that, create reports like that for your managers. Hey guys, I just wanted to throw in a quick video as an extension of the previous one, and I wanted to talk about the resolution field, because that is something that is quite important to know about in Jira. So with respect to the status, while the status tells you the position your issue is in within the workflow, the resolution is a field that Jira uses to determine if an issue is closed, or is the issue resolved versus unresolved. So let's take a look at the open issues, for instance. The filter that Jira uses for that is this resolution field. And you can see that it's looking for all the unresolved tickets. That's what Jira treats as open issues. So in other words, the resolution field allows you to specify the reason an issue was resolved. In most cases, the reason is just that the issue was done. So you can set the resolution to done as well. But sometimes you may resolve a ticket because it's a duplicate of another one, or you're not able to reproduce the problem, or you simply decide that you're not going to do it. So you resolve the ticket and set the resolution to won't do. You can actually create your own custom options for the resolution field as well. And we'll take a look at that in the admin section of the course. So how does this resolution field get set? It usually has to be configured as part of the workflow. So let me show you an example. We're looking at the SSP 14 issue, and currently the status is to do. Let's say that we've completed the work for this ticket, so I can move it to done. Now right away you can see this thing that appeared here. This is the resolution field, and you can see that it's got a tick mark, and so what's happening behind the scenes is that this workflow is configured to automatically set the resolution field to done whenever the issue is transitioned to the done status. And the reason it's so important to know this is because Jira considers that the life cycle of this issue has come to an end because the resolution field has a value. If there is no value, or if the value is unresolved, then according to Jira, the issue isn't resolved and is still open. So sometimes people may set a status to done and they move it to that status, but they don't have any configuration to set that resolution field. So then when they go to use one of the built-in Jira reports, let's say the created issues versus resolved issues report, and then they wonder why the data is skewed, well, because the resolution field wasn't set. Another way that the resolution field is used let's see. So this SSP14 ticket is actually part of the sample sprint. So if I open that up in its own tab and we look for the SSP14 issue, so here it is, you can see that it has a strike through, and that's because the resolution field has been set and Jira treats it as resolved, and as a result it will strike through that issue key. If you see that you're moving tickets to your done or completed status and then the issue key is not getting a strike through, that's probably because the resolution field is not being set. So it's definitely something to understand and know the difference. A lot of students ask me what the difference is between status and resolution. So in summary, the status just tells you the state of an issue with respect to the workflow. But resolved, or the resolution field, tells you whether Jira looks at the issue as being open or not. And setting that resolution is something you have to configure whenever your issues reach that done status. In this section, we are going to talk about all the things you can do to lead an agile team. So if you are a product owner or manager, or just a development manager, scrum master, team lead, your basic responsibilities are going to be to configure and manage agile boards, especially if you're managing agile products or projects. So that would also entail building a backlog by creating stories, making sure the backlog's groomed, setting up sprints during sprint planning meetings, and working with the development team to provide estimations, starting a sprint, planning releases, so on and so forth. So these are some of the topics that we'll be covering in this section. And so let's get started by touching on how you can configure and manage agile boards. Hey guys, welcome back. In this video, we will take a look at how you can configure agile boards. So let's start off with our Scrum board. I also want to mention that I am now logged in as the administrator, otherwise I wouldn't be able to modify any of the settings that we will be seeing. You can access your board settings by coming up here to the top, clicking on the ellipsis, and selecting board settings. And I'm just going to pop that open in its own tab so that as we make changes, we will be able to see that reflect in the board here. And here you can see there are multiple settings and functions that you can configure for your board. And we'll basically be making our way from the top down and go over all of them. So starting off with our general settings. We've got our board name here, which you can modify. Now in terms of the administrators, in addition to the Jira administrator and the project administrator, the users listed here are the only ones who can change these configurations of the board. By default, it is usually the person who created the board, but you can go ahead and you can add more individual users if you want. Now the location is something we've discussed, but this is where you can modify and change the location where this board resides. As I mentioned, every board must reside in one project, so you can switch between projects right here. Next up is the filter. The filter basically determines what issues get displayed on the board. And if you recall, I mentioned that every time you create a board, it creates a corresponding filter which the board ends up using. And for this particular filter, you can see what the query is right here. It's basically project equals SSP, and it's ordered by the rank. So it includes all the projects in SSP that are ordered by rank. So we can actually come in here and we can edit the query. So if I open this up in its own tab as well, that will open up the issue navigator, and you can see it's just filtering by the project and displaying everything else, as in all the issues under this project. So let's do a quick demo here. If I come back to the board, you can see that the subtasks are currently being displayed on the board. But if I come up to the filter, and let's say I want to filter them out. So I'll come in here and I'll select all standard issue types, which basically are all the ones listed here, and all these subtask issue types are below that. So I will select only the standard ones so that we don't display the subtasks. And then got to make sure I save that. Now if I come back to the board you can see that it automatically refreshed and those subtasks are gone. And this, I believe, SSP10 is the story. Now, again, let me just open this up in its own sidebar, but you can see that the subtasks are still under that story. It's just that they're not being displayed on the board. And if I go back to the board settings and let me just refresh this, now you can see the updated query, which is the issue type has to be in the standard issue types function. And this is again another example of an advanced function that you can use in JQL. So let me just go back and let me revert this and then save it again. And now come back to the board and make sure that we're back and we can see the subtasks. All right, I'll do another refresh here as well. Okay, so moving on, this shares. This basically determines who has access to the filter and therefore the board. Right now it's telling me that this board is shared with anyone who also has access to the sample Scrum project. And this is basically the exact same thing as the permissions we saw for that filter. So let me open this up in its own tab as well, which is right here. And so you can see it looks very similar to the permissions of the filter. So I have the filter open, and if I click on details and go to edit permissions, you've got the name, description, and the access restrictions. So similarly, you've got the name, description. I guess it's a little different, but it's essentially the same thing. Down here, you can see it's shared with the sample project, the sample Scrum project, and the same thing here. So if I were to come in and let's say I get rid of this. So let me save this. So now essentially that filter is not shared with anyone. If I click on the details, it will say this filter is only visible to you. So I actually have the developer account logged in a different window. So now as the developer, if I were to, let's just go to the all boards page, you can see the SSP board is no longer showing up. So now if I come back here, and this time let me modify it from the filter page again, edit permissions, and let me add the project back in. So it would be SSP, add, save. And so now coming back here, or actually if I go to, oh, I guess these two tabs are the same. If I open up the filter shares again, it's essentially the same thing, but just to show you, you can see the sample Scrum project was added here. And if I go back to the developer view and I refresh, the SSP board is back. So that's a quick demo of how the shares work. It's basically the same thing as the filter permission. So let me go ahead and close these tabs and let's keep going. So below that we've got ranking, and it's telling us that the board is using rank. And that is because the query is ordered by rank. If I were to remove this sorting by rank, then the board wouldn't be using the rank. And what would happen if I go back to the board, if I go back to the backlog view, and let me just maximize some of the space here. Right now I can click on an issue and I can drag it anywhere I want to within the backlog. But if the board does not use rank, then I wouldn't be able to drag and move things around within the backlog. So I definitely recommend that you keep the order by rank so that the board uses it to allow you to move things around within the backlog. And then the last thing we have here, this basically tells you that the issues that are being displayed on the board are part of the sample Scrum project. And then the last thing over here is the projects in the board, which just tells you what projects are being shown or represented in the board. And in this case, the board just represents one project. Now, you can create Agile boards that display issues from multiple projects, and we will take a look at that in a couple of videos in this section. Alright, so now let's move on to the next part of the board settings, which is columns. This is where you can configure the columns that appear on the board and the kinds of issues that appear in each column. We have 3 columns, and we have also touched on this before, but basically each column is mapped to its respective status. Now you can click and drag the status to different columns. You can even click and drag the columns around, or you can add new columns to configure whatever flow you want to be visualized on the board. And right now, it just happens to be that the columns share the same name as the respective status, but you can call them something different. So for example, I can come in here and instead of calling this column to do, I could just say not started, and in progress would be started. And now if I come back to the board, I'll have to go to the active sprints page. You can see it's now not started and started. Now what would happen if I were to take the done status and remove it from the done column and maybe just keep it as an unmapped status? If we go back to the board, well, that was very interesting. So what happened was that the done column is actually gone, and it looks like there are no issues on the board because I believe this sprint had all the issues in the done column. There was nothing else anywhere else. So in fact, let me go back and put it back in here just so you can see it. I'm going to move some issues back in here to the right now it's the not started and the started columns. Now let me do that again. So when I remove this and I come back to the board, there you go, it's those two issues that are there. And the reason why the done column is gone is because there is no status map to it. So it really has no issues to show you. And so if there are no issues that can ever appear in the column, there's no point displaying the column. So Jira just gets rid of it. So coming back here, what if we took the done status and moved it into the started column? So this is going to be interesting. So we still have only two columns, but now you will see that in the started column, it's going to display all the issues that are either in progress or done, because both those statuses are mapped to that same column. And now something interesting to note is if I were to take this issue from the to-do status and hold it and try to drag it into here, you can see that because there are two statuses now mapped to this column, it creates or highlights two boxes. I can either take it and move it into the in progress box in the column or the done box in the same column. So that's something to keep in mind and what happens whenever you map multiple statuses to the same column, and this issue can go into either one of those statuses. All right, let me come back here and just move the done back to its own column. And another thing I want to point out is the set resolution checkbox here. This is the setting that you can come in and easily specify that when an issue comes into this done column, that you should set that resolution to being done. And we had talked about this as being a very important step so that Jira can actually identify that issue as being resolved and not open anymore. Now if I come back here to the top, you have the column constraint feature as well. So similar to a Kanban board, you can specify column constraints in a Scrum board. So if I were to select issue count, you will see that these no min and no max boxes appeared for each of the columns. So for example, if I were to come in for the not started column and say that the maximum is 1, and now if I go back to the board, so obviously the done column is back, but let's say I were to move this issue from in progress back to to-do, now you can see that column highlighted in red because we are violating that constraint that we had just put in where only a maximum of one issue could be in this column. If I were to come back and remove that constraint, then that highlight would go away and things would look normal. And as we finish up this part of the board settings, I also want to point out that you can come in and you can add a status from here. And so this will list out all the existing statuses available in your Jira instance. So if I were to come in and select selected for development and click on add, it will appear here as an unmapped status, and I can move it either into an existing column or I can come in here and I can add a new column. And if I come in here and I type out selected for development, and let me go ahead and I add that in there. So you can see it automatically mapped that column to the status. Now one thing to be careful of is if I put this back to an unmapped status, and let me delete this column. If I were to come in and click on add column, and let's say I just typed out selected, right? What Jira is going to do is it's probably going to create a status because it can't find a status called selected. But I'm creating a column, and what it's going to do is it's going to create a status called selected. And if I click on add, There you go. So you can see it created a new status, but what I really wanted to do is map this. So I can just come in and bring this in here and then take this out, and then it looks like it's cut off a little bit if I scroll to the right. So I should be able to get rid of it. Now, I don't know if this is another glitch, but let me just try refreshing. Okay, yeah, so I don't know, this X wasn't appearing before, but I can come in and just remove that entirely. So that's a look at this column section, and just something to keep in mind when you're adding statuses and columns and playing around with this. But you can really have as many columns as you want, basically representing the workflow that you want to visualize on the board. Alright, let's now actually take a break, and we'll continue on the rest of these settings in the next video. One thing I forgot to point out in the last video is just around this new status. Because we added this new column and a corresponding status, one thing I just wanted to point out is now if I go to the workflow, so if I click on any issue and come up here and view the workflow being used, it's just something I wanted to confirm with you guys that this status is now part of the workflow and you can transition from any other status to this one. So that's just a simple way that you can actually modify the workflow. You can do so right here and add whatever statuses you want. Okay, so moving on, let's continue down our settings here and look at swim lanes. Swim lanes are basically rows on the board that you can use to group your issues. So right now it is configured to be based on stories. So if we go back to the board, you can see that this story has subtasks, so it kind of creates a row for itself to display the tasks under it. But none of the other issues have subtasks, so they all kind of appear in its own row called other issues. But if I were to come in here, and let's maybe change this to be based on assignees. And now if I go back, you can see the rows are based on assignees. And if you have a lot of users on this board, then you can just come in here and you can collapse all the swim lanes. So now you can see all the different assignees. In this case, we really only have 2 users, and then everything else would fall under unassigned. But that's essentially the gist of it, to be able to come in and group your issues by rows. And you can see here it says unassigned issues will show up below all the other swim lanes. You can have that show up at the top, so then you know that all the unassigned appear at the top. You can go in and you can assign them accordingly. You can also create a custom swim lane by selecting the queries option. And so here you can just put in the name of your swim lane. So if we want to maybe go by priority, so the highest priority, we will ask that to be the expedited lane. And so here you would put in your JQL. So you want the priority equals, and then it suggests, so let's go with the highest and click add. And then maybe we can have another swim lane for high. And then again, priority equals high. And then click add. And then maybe everything else at the bottom. Maybe let's have expedite at the top. So now if I go back, so you don't see any swim lanes. And that is because all these issues have a medium priority. So if I were to maybe come in here and let's modify the priority. So I come in here and let's set this to be highest. And then this one, we can set this to be high. And so probably need to do a refresh on that. There you go. So now we've got the expedite swim lane, the high, and then everything else below that. So that's a look at the swim lanes. Moving on to the quick filters. So let me show you what these are. These are basically these buttons here that act as filters, and you have the ability to go in and provide more. So let's say the manager wants to create a quick filter where he can easily spot the bugs. So we can call this bugs. And then the JQL, what do you think the JQL should be? Well, bug is an issue type. So if we start typing issue, and then we can see the last option here is issue type, and then equals, and then we can just pick from the suggested ones, and then click add. So now if I go back to the board, probably need to do another refresh. And there you go. Now we have another filter called bugs. And when I select that, it will only display the bugs on the board. So you can go ahead and you can actually create as many quick filters as you want just to create an easier way to identify and find the issues on the board. Okay, so moving on to card colors. This is again another feature that can help you visualize the board a bit better, where you can highlight some of the cards that have the same characteristic, where they would all have the same color. So let me show you what that looks like. Maybe what I want to use, if I pick priorities, so you can see all the different priorities show up here, and you can specify what color you want. So, if you want a brighter red. And what I will do is I will remove the priority swim lane that we created. So let me just say that there are no swim lanes. And so now if I go back to the board, the swim lanes are gone. But now beside each of the cards, you can see this vertical bar that is highlighted with a color, which is the exact same thing that we just configured. So all the highest priority colors will have that bright red, and then, the ones that are medium would have orange, and so on and so forth based on how you configured it. And you can also configure it by queries. So maybe an example that I want to show you, in fact, I'll take it right from the quick filters. If you don't want to come in here and always click on recently updated, and you just want to identify them easily, you can come in here and you can steal this JQL, come into the colors, and then paste it in here so that all the issues that haven't been updated in a day have that red color. Click add. And then so now if I go back to the board, actually that's my mistake. This is recently updated. So this identifies the issues that have been recently updated. More realistically, if you want to look at issues that haven't been updated recently, then you can switch this, click update. And now if we go back to the board, so all these issues that have been marked as done, they've probably just been sitting there for a long time. So that's why they're highlighted. But it makes sense if you have issues that are not complete and they haven't been updated in a long time, they would get highlighted, and so it helps you identify them to maybe move them along. All right, let's move on to the card layout. Now, for every card on the board, Jira allows you to display up to 3 additional fields, just so you can get the most important pieces of information at a bird's eye level on the board, rather than having to click through to view the details. So what I mean by that is if I go back to the board, we have some information already available, like the summary, the issue type, priority, and the assignee. But what if there's more information you want to see? You would have to click on the issue and then find that respective detail in this details panel over here. So using the labels as an example, let's say I don't want to always click on the issue to find the label, and I just want to see it on the card itself. So let me use this as an example, and I'll select the maintenance label we had created in one of the earlier videos, and then maybe let me select another issue and do the same thing here. So come into labels and maintenance. All right, so now if I come up here, this is something that you can do in the backlog as well as the active sprint view. Since we're looking at the sprint view, let me do it here. So I will find labels and click add. And so now if I go to the sprint view, it refreshes and you can see the maintenance label appearing here, right over there. And yep, I don't think we have any other issues. Oh, looks like we have 3. So I think this may have been the issue we had updated in one of the earlier videos. So now we've got 3 issues with the maintenance label. And you can do the same thing in the backlog view. So if I come in here and look for labels once again, click add, and then up here, come up to the backlog view. So you can see for all these issues it says none, which means there are no labels, but then when I come up here, you can see the labels displayed here. So like I said, you can display up to 3 extra fields, and there are a lot to choose from, and it's just another convenient way of getting information right on the board when you're looking at the cards and not having to click on each one to find that detail in the issue details section. All right, so moving on, we're almost done. Looking at the estimation tab here, This tells you how the development team is able to estimate, or what the estimation is based on. You can see that now it is based on story points. And if I go back to the board, let's switch to the backlog view. So all these issues have an estimate in story points. And if I click on one of them and scroll down, you can see the story points field over here. But if I come in here and let's switch this to original time estimate. And if I come back to the backlog view and let me do a quick refresh. You can see the story point estimates are gone, but now I guess this one we had put in a time estimate in one of the earlier videos, and if I scroll down, you can see the story point field is still there, but it is actually using the original time estimate, which is done in the form of time, whether it's minutes or hours or days. So M represents minutes, and then H is for hours, and then of course, if you want to mention days, you can come in here and you can specify 2D to represent 2 days. And then now that estimate would appear over here. And what is this time tracking section? This basically just tells you how issues will be burned down during the sprint. So if you don't have this enabled, so as in it's set to none, the issues will basically burn down whatever estimate you have. In this case, it is the original time estimate. And if I change it to story points, it will burn down the story point value when that issue gets completed. Now, if I were to select this option, remaining estimate and time spent, it will basically burn down the issues as and when the users log time. So for example, if I come down here, now that I've put in an original estimate of 2 days, I can come in and I can click on this time tracking section and log some time. So if I come in and log 4 hours, it's going to tell me there's a day and 4 hours left, because 8 hours represent a day, so that's a total of 16 hours in 2 days. So if I put in 4 hours, that leaves back a day and 4 hours, which is essentially 12 hours. So I can come in and click save. So now you will see that 4 hours have been logged and this much time is remaining, and that is what would get reflected in the burn down chart. Okay, as we continue working down, and let's look at the working days. So this is by default set to Monday to Friday, but if there are holidays coming up for the team, you can add those dates specifically. Now this may not be used that often, but it primarily comes in handy when you're doing reports or retrospectives on a sprint to see how much the team was able to achieve and when trying to calculate the velocity. Because if you had less time during that sprint, it makes sense to put it in here so that it doesn't end up skewing the reports, because developers obviously had fewer number of hours available to work on issues in that sprint. So this is where you can set things up like that. Atlassian now has the roadmap feature available as well, which is usually enabled by default, but you've probably noticed it missing in my videos, and that's because it's a relatively newer feature that Atlassian introduced. Now, I don't use this roadmap feature. You can see it appears here, and there's a toggle that I can toggle it on or off. So if I disable that, that link or feature basically disappears. So it's up to you if you want to use it. I don't use the roadmap feature because I feel it lacks in a lot of functionality. It's the basic roadmap feature by Atlassian. On Jira Cloud Premium, you get the advanced roadmaps feature, which I find to be more valuable for project planning, but unfortunately, you would need to upgrade to Jira Premium. This is more of just a high-level visual way of plotting your epics and seeing the progress of your work. I'm not going to get into this right now, as I cover this basic roadmap feature in the Team Manage Project section of the course. But if you're already here, I encourage you to play around with it, try some things, and see what the capabilities are. For now, I'm just going to go back to the settings, and I'm going to have it disabled for now. Okay, so that's basically a look at how you can manage and configure Agile boards, specifically focusing on a Scrum board. Now let's take a look at a Kanban board, which will be very similar. However, there are some nuances which we will take a look at. Alright, so now that we have seen how to configure a Scrum board, let's take a look at a Kanban board. So I'm going to use the SKP board that we have created for our sample Kanban project. And right off the bat, you can see here that there are 4 columns. And we'll be able to see which statuses are mapped to these columns. There are no swim lanes here. Looks like we have our default quick filters, and we can see that there is a constraint in the in progress column. So let's take a look at the settings. You can see here that the Kanban board has the exact same list of settings that we saw in the Scrum board. So we will be able to speed through this pretty quickly because I am not going to be covering all the details again. So if you're watching this video and haven't taken a look at the previous videos on configuring the Scrum Agile board, I would ask that you please view that first to see us talk about all these settings in more detail. So in this video, we are just going to cover the main differences. So in the general settings, there is one main difference, but you can see here that the filter, the shares, and rank and projects in the board, these are all the same. But when you come down here to the bottom, you can see that Kanban has this thing called the board subfilter. And what this is doing is it's basically filtering out the issues that have already been in a released release. So in other words, it is making sure only the issues in an unreleased version gets displayed. So let me talk about that in more detail. So let me go back to the board, and just a quick refresher on Kanban. There are no sprints. Tickets move from left to right as developers work on them, and once a set of tickets are done, you can generate a release, basically telling Jira that those done tickets are released or live and no longer need to show up on the board. So for example, right now we have 4 issues in the done column. If I come up here to the release dropdown, I can go ahead and create a new version and maybe call this, actually I'm not going to go ahead and actually release it, but I just wanted to show you. You can come in and you can create the version, and then if you click on release, that means that you are basically releasing the version and all the issues in the done column would disappear. If you didn't have this feature, then this done column would keep growing and growing, and even if there are issues that have been released, they would appear here kind of cluttering the board. So the moment you create a Kanban release and then mark it as released, all the done tickets will be cleared off the board, and we will look at Kanban releases in one of the upcoming videos. So coming back to the board settings, and let me actually open it up in a new tab. Below the subfilter, you've got another feature that helps you keep a good control on that done column. So here you can ask the board to hide all completed issues that are older than a certain amount of time. And this again is another benefit in the sense of it avoids this column from building and building as you keep marking and moving issues to the done column, to prevent that being just cluttered with issues that you don't really need to worry about anymore. You can come in here and you can say that anything that has been completed more than 2 weeks, for example, should be cleared off the board, so it doesn't appear here anymore. Okay, so that is one main difference in the general settings of the board. Let's move on to columns. So like I mentioned, we have 4 columns, and looks like we've got 4 statuses, and each column is mapped to its respective status, and the constraint we saw has been configured right here, specifying that only a max of 1 release can go into the in progress column. Everything is pretty much the same here except for one main difference in a Kanban board. If you look here, you see this option for a Kanban backlog. Now let me talk about this for a little bit. So coming back to the board here, we saw that we have some functionality to help us keep a good control of the done column so that it doesn't keep growing and growing. Well, what about the backlog column? Let's say this project or this board was created for people to throw on new ideas, and any new bugs that are created also keeps getting added to this this backlog here. Since backlog here happens to be the first column, also the first status in the workflow, so any new ticket that gets created in this project would keep getting tacked on into this column, thereby potentially making this column expand and grow longer and longer, thereby making it a little unmanageable. So what Jira did was it gave us an option of having a separate backlog where you can maintain it. So let me demo this. If I take the backlog status and let me drag and move it into this Kanban backlog section, so we would expect that the backlog column should disappear because now there's no status mapped to that column. So when I come back to the board, the backlog column is gone. And now if you pay attention to the top left here, let me do a quick refresh. So you can see that in addition to the board, we now have a backlog view which looks exactly like the Scrum backlog view. So even though this is not a Scrum format board, it is a Kanban board, but we do have this backlog view that lets us manage the backlog a little better. So every issue that's in the backlog status will come up here under the backlog section, and so it doesn't really affect your board. So you can come up here and you can create as many issues as you want, and the product manager can go and manage this backlog separately, and then as and when he or she decides that something should be prioritized and moved into the development queue, they can just take it and drag it into the selected for development status, which would be the next status in the workflow, and now you would see that issue appearing in the board. So developers only need to look at this board and they can see everything that's selected for development, and they can start working on it and moving it down the workflow as part of the regular development process. And you can see Jira even calls it out to you to point out that this feature is available. So let me just close that so we can maximize our space here. So that is the essence of the backlog feature in Kanban. It's not to be confused with a Scrum backlog because you still do not have sprints. It is just a means for you to separate out your growing list of issues in the backlog and keep the board a little more consolidated and easier to work with. Now, one more thing I want to point out is as soon as I had moved that status from the column into the Kanban backlog section, this little epics panel switch popped up. So what that lets me do is if I go back to the backlog view, similarly to the Scrum view, the Scrum backlog view, we used to have the versions and epics option here. So versions I can click on and it'll expand that into its own column. Now if I can turn this on, basically turning the epics panel on, so similarly, if I do a quick refresh, I should see the epics option now appear. So I can expand that in its own column to see all the epics listed in this project. So this makes it even more similar to the Scrum backlog view. So this is a really helpful feature that Jira introduced to be able to manage Kanban boards a lot better. And in terms of the remaining settings over here, they are all pretty much the same. So whether it's configuring swim lanes or quick filters, once again, you can set it up based on queries, or you can, card colors, you can go based off the predefined options or queries, so on and so forth. Again, I'm not going to go through these details because we've done so in previous videos, but I just wanted to at least call out the main differences, which is the Kanban backlog feature and then the subfilters that you see in the general settings. So there you go. There's a look at our boards in more detail, both the Scrum and Kanban boards. Let's move on to the next video in this section. In the last few videos, we looked at how you would configure Agile boards, and as a team lead, that is probably something you would be doing to help your team members work on the boards. But what else would you be doing? Whether you're a project manager, product owner, or Scrum Master, you would probably have the responsibility of grooming the backlog, setting up sprints, helping the team create the sprint backlog, starting the sprints, monitoring the progress, closing the sprints, and of course, you would also be responsible for creating versions to track the software releases and looking at reports all at the end. So now what I'm going to do for the rest of this section is basically start from scratch. And what that entails is first creating my own project. If you're working in a small team, chances are that you as the Agile lead will probably have administration privileges, or at least the ability to create projects. If you're in a larger organization, then chances are there's probably a dedicated Jira administrator who creates all the projects, and you may have to reach out to that individual for getting that done. But for now, we'll assume that you as the Agile team leader has admin privileges and are able to create projects. And so what I will be doing is that the project I will create will actually represent this very course, and I will use it for the remainder of the section and the course. So what I'm going to do is create a project and call it Jira course, and I'll set it up as a Scrum project. I will then create epics to represent each of the sections in this course, and then I'll put in stories within each of those epics to represent each video in the course. And as I go through each section, I'm going to start a sprint and then close the sprint for that section when I'm done with it. So for example, as I'm walking you through the remainder of this particular section, I will be using and updating my project as we go, and hopefully that will give you a good sense of how the Scrum lifecycle would work in Jira, at least from the eyes of an Agile lead. So let's get started. I'm going to first create my project. Now I'm in the project page and I can either click on create project here, or just from the navbar dropdown I can click create project. This project creation process has changed a bit, so I'm just posting a new update here. The first thing you'll have to do is select the project template. What I want is the Scrum template. And I'd actually say that the Kanban and Scrum templates are the two most popular ones when it comes to creating software projects. There's also a bug tracking template, and for each one you can click through and you can see it gives you an outline of what you get with the project. But mainly the differences are the issue types and the workflow statuses that are available. So for example, in this bug tracking template, you can see that the story issue type is not available by default. You can, however, add it in later yourself if you'd like to, but just off the bat, it doesn't come with it. And you can see in the workflow, it's got a status for in review. If I go back and look at the Scrum template, you can see that it does have the story issue type, and there are only 3 statuses where the in review status is missing. But again, you can go and you can modify the workflow to your heart's content. Now, I have never actually used the bug tracking template because if I'm creating a software project, then Scrum and Kanban are pretty much the most popular ones. If you don't need software specific functionality like sprints, and perhaps you're just tracking business tasks or are part of one of the business teams, then if you recall, work management offers a whole bunch of business related project templates for you to select. And you can even break it into individual team project templates. So for example, if I go to marketing, there's a whole bunch of marketing related project templates that are available. So for example, if I were to look at event planning, you can see that it only comes with task and subtask, and the workflow's got these statuses for ideating, planning, so on and so forth. Let's take a look at HR. So we've got a new employee onboarding project template, and you can see it's got a fairly unique, I guess, a custom issue type called employee, and it just gives you various statuses that are relevant to onboarding a new employee. Similarly, they have a recruitment template. So in this case, you're going to be creating issues to represent each candidate that gets interviewed. And then it's got statuses that represents different stages of that interview lifecycle. So there's a whole bunch available here for business teams. And, I recommend checking it out if it piques your interest, if it's something that you think your company would benefit from. Ultimately, all the projects use the underlying core functionality of Jira, which is to have a workflow and a board where you can visualize all the work. And the subtle differences between the templates are the workflow statuses and issue types that come by default. But as I mentioned, of course, each one is customizable, so you can modify the workflows, add more issue types, and so on. So let's get back on track here, and I'll head over to software development and select Scrum. And we'll click on use template. And now the next thing is to pick the project type. So software projects have 2 types, as we had briefly seen before when we set up the Jira instance: team managed and company managed. Team managed, once again, is meant for self-independent teams that don't want to rely on a Jira admin. I do have a dedicated section on this later on, so we'll be going with company managed, but feel free to scroll through and just read up on the differences between the two. So we'll click select a company managed project, and so here we're going to give it a name. As I mentioned, I'm just going to call this Jira course, and I am okay with the key that it suggests. Now, because this project is going to be managed by a Jira admin, you have the ability to specify whether you want this project to share its configuration with another company managed project that's already in the instance. So that's an option available for Jira admins. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to hit create project, and I'm going to send you back to the previous recording of the video where we'll continue. Okay, so I am taken right into the sprint view, but we don't have any sprints and the backlog is empty. We're basically starting from scratch in this project. So the first thing I'm going to do is let me just take a look at the board settings. And I think I'm okay with all of this, the shares, the query, all of this is fine. If I switch to columns, what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to remove the in progress. This is because each of the issues that I create in this project are going to represent these videos. And so the status of the video would either be to do, so I'll have to make the videos, and then once I do it, they will be done. I'm not really planning on moving any issues into the in progress status, so I can just get rid of that. And when I go back to the board, I will just have the two columns that I need. And at this point, I'll leave the board settings as is. So the next step for me would be to start filling in this project with epics and stories. So let's do that in the next video. As a new project lead in Jira, the first task would be to think through the work required in the project and start creating the issues. And that's what we will be doing in this video, namely creating some epics and stories. So once again, I could come up here and click on the universally available create button, or I can just use the letter C on my keyboard. Alright, so I should make sure that the correct project is selected, and I'll stick with the issue type as story for now. And the first thing I'm going to create, actually, you know what, let me create my epics first. So I'll select epic. And for the first epic, I will call this the current section, which is leading an agile team. And for the summary, I'll just put in something a little more detailed. All right, so now I can scroll down. I can put in a description if I wanted to, but I'll just leave everything else as is. And let me create another one after this. Hit create. All right, so that epic was created. Now I'm going to create the epic for the next section, which is the administration section of the course, and put in an appropriate summary. And let's just go with these two for now. So I'll uncheck this and hit create. Okay, so now if I expand my epics column, I should see the two epics there. The next step is to create my stories or issues that are going to go into those epics. So once again, I can hit the letter C, and this time I will specify story. And let me create one to represent the first part of this section, which was configuring the Agile boards. And as I scroll down here, I can come in and specify the epic I want it to go under. So I will pick the leading Agile team. That's the section it was under, and hit create. So now we've got our first issue in the backlog, and it is already added into the leading Agile team epic. Keep in mind also that you can change the color of this epic if you want and how it displays on the board. So if I want to go with a brighter green, now looks like it didn't update there, but let me just try refreshing. Alright, so there it got updated. I'm noticing a lot of these glitches, or maybe Atlasian wanted it to work that way where you had to do a refresh. But oh well, as long as it works in the end, right? Now, we saw that another way to create issues could be just on the board itself right here. So let's add one for the previous video where we created the project. And I can click and drag this issue into the epic and add it in that way. Now the remaining issues I create, I also want in the epic. So what I can do that we had seen before is if I just select it, it's going to filter the board by that epic, and any other issue I create now should get automatically added into the epic as well. Now I don't have to keep the remaining issues in a story format. I just did the first two as an example to kind of just remind you or revisit that format of writing out a user story. I will actually create the rest of them as tasks. So the current video I'm recording is to create user stories or tasks to populate the backlog. Alright, so as I submitted that one in, I just get a pop-up asking me to create a sprint. I'll close that for now, but you can see that this issue automatically got added to the epic. So let's create a couple more. Once we are done this video, we are going to groom the backlog and set up our first sprint. And then we will look at setting up software versions. And then finally look at closing a sprint and looking at reports. So there you go. As a product manager, I thought through some work and I was able to quickly put in at least the summary of the issues. Now I can go in there and individually put in more details as I see fit. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to think through all the videos that I would like to create as part of this section. But I'm sure you don't want to spend your time just looking at me creating issues and typing text. So I'm going to stop this video and I'll see you in the next one, where I'll hopefully have a backlog set up with a bunch of stories or tasks, and we can move on to our next goal as the project lead, which would be to create a sprint backlog and then start a sprint. In this video, we are going to set up our first sprint backlog and then eventually start a sprint. So here you can see I ended up creating a bunch of tasks to represent the videos that I'll be doing in this section, and I also took the liberty of creating the ones for the next section. So now to create a sprint backlog, I will have to create a sprint first. So if I click on Create Sprint, there you go, it just pops up this section at the top here, and it automatically names it as the key of the project, so JC and then Sprint 1. Now you can always come in and you can edit that sprint, and you can change the name, you can put in a goal, so that option is always there. Now because we haven't started the sprint, we can come in and we can start creating issues that will get added to the sprint directly, or we can just move the existing issues from the backlog into the sprint. And like I said before, I want to tackle one entire section as being in its own sprint. So I can just select these set of issues as part of the Leading an Agile Team epic, and I can either right click and then just ask Jira to send it to the JC Sprint 1, or I can just click and drag them in myself. Alright, so now we have the issues in the sprint backlog, and this is something that the product manager may elect to do on his own, or he may work with the team and decide what is feasible. And then as part of the sprint review meeting, which is when the team would work together to create and kind of make sure the sprint backlog is complete and ready to start the sprint, a discussion would take place to go in and put in the estimates and make sure all the details of all the issues are complete. And one of the main topics of that discussion is around the estimation, to make sure that the total estimate of all these issues is something that the team can realistically target. Alright, so how would you go about putting in the estimates? Now, there is one thing that I forgot to do, in that in the board settings, I want to just update the estimation that instead of story points, I personally prefer to use the original time estimate. So I'll just select that, and this remaining estimate and time spent will also be enabled, because I would just want to show you how you can log work, which ends up burning down in the burn down chart. So we'll go with that, go back to the board, and now we can start putting in our estimates. Now I'm just going to be doing this for example purposes, but as I select the issue and scroll down, I can find the original estimate field, and I believe I mentioned before that the format could be M for minutes, H for hours, and D for days. So if I were to come in and specify 1H, that would mean that the estimate is 1 hour. And then you can see this time tracking section also appeared over here. This is how you could log work, and right now obviously no time has been logged so far. Okay, so if I go on to the next issue and the team's discussing and we decide that this would take 1 day, so we can go in and put that in. You could even put estimates in minutes. So the default is in minutes, as you can see, 0M, but you can come in and you can say 30 minutes. If you end up putting 60 minutes, what would happen is it would just convert it to an hour automatically. And the same thing would apply from hours to days. So if I were to come in and say that this is 8 hours, Jira would automatically convert that to 1 day because it is currently configured that 1 day is equivalent to 8 hours. That's something that you can also change, and that would be available in the admin section. So just like that, if I keep going, and I'm just trying to show as many examples as I can, if I come in and put in 10 hours, we would expect that to convert to 1 day and 2 hours. There you go. So I'm just going to continue for the remaining 3 issues and put in some estimates. Okay, so I've gone ahead and put in estimates for each of these issues. We've got a total of 1 week, 2 days, and 6 hours worth of work. And again, just remember that these are all just made up hours that I put in. It's just for example purposes. But in your realistic sprint review meeting, you can work with your team to now figure out if this is a realistic target, especially if you know your velocity that you've been calculating and updating from previous sprints. Okay, so the team has decided that this is a realistic sprint backlog, and we can now go ahead and start the sprint. So clicking on Start Sprint would give you a pop-up where you can again change the name if you want to, and you can pick the duration to be either 1, 2, 3, or 4 weeks, or even a custom date range, and manually pick your start and end dates. For now, I'll just go, actually I will pick custom, and I'm going to specify 1 day because I hope to complete the sprint and finish all these videos within 24 hours. So let's just go with that. And I'm going to start it. Alright, so now we have an active sprint going, and your team can now start working on the issues one by one and moving them across the board from left to right. Obviously, this board is very simple as I had intended it to be, so we only have 2 columns, but in a realistic scenario and team and project, you're probably going to have a lot more columns and a lot more statuses. And another thing that the developers can do as they work on issues is they can log time. So if we look at these, we've actually completed the Agile boards part and the creating a project, and we've also created user stories and tasks. So let's say that this is complete and the hour estimate of work is done. So I can come in here and I can click on this time tracking section to bring up this time tracking window or pop-up that we had seen before briefly, and I can go in and I can put in 1 hour and let it automatically burn down, so the time remaining would be 0, and you can go in and put in a comment and click save. And let me do, so that is done. I can now click and drag it into the done column. So going to the next task as well, another way I can log work is coming up to the ellipsis here, and you can see a lot of familiar functions that you can do with this issue, but the first one available is log work, and I get the same thing. So now, let's say this took me a little more time. So let's say it took me an hour, more than a day. So I'm going to put in, I can either do 1 day and 1 hour, or I could just do, let's say 10 hours. So then you can see it burns it down, but it kind of changes the progress bar and creates a little yellow part of it to show that you've spent more time than what was initially estimated. So let's go with that and click save. And I'm going to move that over to the done column as well. And we've also completed this video, which is creating our user stories and tasks. So I'm going to move that over. Maybe I won't log work against that. And that's where we are right now. So if I go back to the backlog view, I can see up here that I have completed about 1 day and 2 hours of the estimates, while I still have this much left. So this is a good way for the Scrum Master to kind of monitor the boards and progress of work and basically follow up with the team, have your daily stand-ups, touch base on the status of the tickets and what each team member is working on, if there are any blockers, and all that jazz. Alright, so that takes care of the creating and starting a sprint video. In fact, I will go back to my sprint view and I will drag this into the done column as well, and that's that. So now as the sprint is going and the project is starting to gain momentum, the project owner can now start creating versions to track software releases. So let's take a look at that in the next video. Alright, so next up in the list is software versions. So let's create some versions for this project. Now you can create versions by going into the backlog. If you expand the versions panel, you can create a version right there. Or you can go to the releases section of the project and create all your versions here as well. So this page contains all the versions created in the project. And if you recall, versions are basically your targeted software releases, hence they call this page releases. And it would contain the software versions you are planning on releasing. So let's go ahead and create a couple. The first one I want to create is a release for the team lead section of the course, of course. And you have the option of specifying a start date as well as a target release date. So I can just come in and put in today's date. And let's create another one. And this is going to be for the admin section. And a hypothetical release date would maybe be a week from now or 2 weeks from now. Who knows? I'm just doing this for example purposes. Hit save. And there you go. So now we have our 2 releases. So if we go back to the backlog view, we should see them appear in the versions column. So let's expand that out. And there you go. So our 2 versions are now there. Okay, so next would be to add issues to the versions. So what we could do, these are all the issues that I created for the Leading an Agile Team Epic that I plan on completing in the sprint, and I would like to release them as well the moment the sprint is done. Now keep in mind, it's not necessarily always the case that every single sprint leads to a release. You can have multiple sprints started and completed before you do a software release. So in this case, it just happens to be that I'm doing one release after the first sprint. So as I dragged and dropped those issues into there, you could see that they all got this label of what version they're on. And similarly, if I come to the backlog and take all the Jira administration issues and drag them into the admin section version, they should get updated accordingly as well. You can even come in here and expand the version, and you can see how many issues are in there and what the progress is for completing that version. Let's head over to the details page of this version. So you can also access this from the releases section of the project by clicking on the respective version, and it will bring you to this page where you can see all the issues listed out in the version, how many are complete, how many are still pending. At the top it gives you the details such as your start or release date as well as release notes. And then once all the tickets or issues are complete and you're ready to release this version, you can come up here to the top right and just click on release. And right now it's saying that there are 4 unresolved issues, so it asks you what would you like to do with them. Would you like to ignore and just proceed and release anyway, or maybe move the issues to the future release? So I'll just cancel out of this right now because this is something we will do in a couple videos. Let me talk about the release notes for a bit. So release notes basically contains all the issues that are under the release. You can come down here and copy and paste this text and put it somewhere else, such as a document, or if you're sharing with some of the project stakeholders, so on and so forth. You can even come up here to the top and configure release notes. So here you can specify the version and the format that you would like it in, depending on how you want to copy or what format you would want to provide to your stakeholders. So this is just an added feature that you can use if you feel like you need to. And so as your project continues and you have more and more versions released, you can always come back to the releases section and take a look at the previous software releases you did and what all the issues were that went into the respective release. Alright, so we've created versions for our project and the sprint is still ongoing. So I'm just heading over back to the sprint view and I'm going to mark this as complete. In fact, let me log whatever estimate we put in there. Let me log the same amount of time. So if I come down here and click on this, and let's go with, so that would be 10 hours. Put that in there, hit save. So it would completely burn it down. Sometimes it takes a minute to refresh. But if I come into the issue, as long as I see this, that means it worked. All right. So now as we approach the end of the sprint, we would close it or complete the actual sprint and see what's involved with that. And then we will take a look at the reports that are available thereafter. But before we get into that, I also want to take a look at how we can create some releases in a Kanban-based project. Let's take a look at how we would do releases for a Kanban project. It's actually quite straightforward. So the first thing is let's head over to the SKP board, which is the board created for our sample Kanban project. And let me just get rid of that message at the top. Alright, so when we look at the Kanban board, we see here that there are 4 issues that are currently done. So once again, this project also has a releases section and I can go in there, I can create a release there, or if I just want to create a release, I can come up here and select new version and let's call this sample Kanban, release 1. Alright, and then click on release. And right away you see all those 4 issues are now cleared from the board. And that is where that sub-filter that we had looked at before, that's where this comes into play. So now if I head over to the releases section, and let's make sure we filter by the releases as well. So you can see the one that we just created, and the one before that is probably a sample one that came with the sample data. So now you can go into this release, and you can see what it involved. So obviously there are no issues pending, but there were a total of 4 issues and all 4 of them were complete. So this is basically a summary of what that release included. And once again, as your team continues to work on this Kanban board, this is where they can come back and look at what issues fell under which releases. Alright, so that was a quick look at releases. It's very similar to the sprint board. So let's go back to our project board here, and I'm going to mark one more item as complete, and it would be this one. Let's drag it into the done column. Alright, let's move on to the next video. We're not going to close the sprint just yet. We need to tackle creating an Agile board with multiple projects, so let's check it out. In this video, we are going to go through how you can create an Agile board for multiple projects. Now, this isn't really related to the sprint lifecycle, but was one of the videos I wanted to include in this section of the course anyway, so might as well do it before we complete the sprint, even if I decide to add more videos to this section later on. Besides, as a manager, this is something important to know, because Agile boards are so useful and effective, especially if, as a project manager, you have to manage multiple projects. A good example of that is, let's say the development team comprises of a backend team that handles the backend application server-side development, whereas a client team that handles the front-end client, which could be a mobile application or a website, whatever the case may be. So let's say the project is to build a mobile app. Your front-end team would work on the mobile development and would track and use a Jira project for their own work, whereas the backend team would be building the brains and data store of the application and would be using their own Jira project. Although both teams are working in tandem to launch the exact same product. So now each of those Jira projects can have their own respective boards, but what you can do is instead of having to go into the respective boards to see the respective team sprints and monitoring them separately, it can be quite convenient at times to merge multiple boards into one. Basically meaning that a single Agile board will incorporate all the issues for both teams so you can see what's going on overall across the entire development pipeline. So let's take a look at that. We are going to go back to the boards page, and I am going to create a new board, and let's again pick the Scrum option because I will be using 2 Scrum based projects just for example purposes. Now, if you see here, when you create a board, there are a couple of options. I can create one with a completely brand new software project, or I can create a board from existing projects, or I can use an existing saved filter. So if you remember, I had mentioned that the board filter determines what shows up on the boards, right? So it's basically the same thing as a search filter, but a board can end up using it as well. So if you have a saved filter in Jira, you can create a board using that filter, which will basically just display the issues that are returned by the filter. But for this example purpose, I'm going to create a board from existing projects. We'll hit next, and this board I'm going to call it the Combined Agile Board. And in terms of the projects, let's go ahead and pick the Jira course project, and let's pick the SSP project, because I know that we have sprints in both of them. Now once again, we have to pick a location for it, and it can only be one project. So for this one, I'll just go ahead and pick the SSP project and create the board. Alright, so it took us to the backlog of the Combined Agile board, which you can see is listed under the sample Scrum project, and through the board switcher I can see now there are 2 boards under this project, and I can easily switch between them or go to the other boards from other projects. So let's take a look at this backlog. Given that now this board is displaying issues from 2 projects, and each of those projects have their own sprints, you can see both the sprints displayed here. The sample sprint from the SSP project and the JC sprint from our Jira course project. And well, we had another sample sprint as well from SSP, and then the backlog contains issues from both SSP as well as Jira course. And so similarly, if we go to the active sprint view, you can see that it's displaying both the sprints. And we have an additional drop down here where you can select only one sprint if you'd like to just see that one. So here's the sample sprint, and then similarly here's our ongoing JC sprint. Now even though we weren't using the in progress column in the JC sprint, it's still appearing here because this is a new board and sample sprint happened to have been using it. So if we wanted to get rid of it, we would have to go into the respective board settings, the column section, and then unmap the in progress status. In fact, let's take a look at the board settings. So when I come in here, and let's head over to the General tab, so you can see that the filter that was created for this is called Filter for Combined Agile Board, and this is what the query is. It just factors in the 2 projects and displays all the issues under each of them. You can see it is shared with anyone who has access to either of the projects, and it tells you that these 2 projects are represented in the board. Let's head over to the column section, and you can see here that if you recall, when we were doing the demo with the SSP board, we ended up creating a new status, and so you can see that these 2 statuses, the selected for dev and to do, ended up being mapped to the to-do column. So if you want, you can always go ahead and create a new column and call this selected for dev, and you can move that right before in progress and then map selected for dev there, so that when you go back to the board, now you have got 4 columns, even though it says new column. Did we not name that? Oh, I must not have saved it. So let's try that again. Hit enter. Okay, so now if we go back to the board, there you go. So we probably never had any issues in that column. So the column's empty, but the provisions are there. And that's something you just have to keep in mind when you create an Agile board that incorporates issues from multiple projects that each have their own workflows and statuses, to just come into the board settings and configure the columns so that it shows up the way you want. So that was a look at how you can create an Agile board to track multiple projects in one single board. Now, if or maybe I can just find it here. Yep, so there it is, creating the Agile board with multiple projects. This is the one that we're currently recording. So now that we've approached the end of the video, I can take this and you can see that I can either move it into the in progress or done column. So let's just mark it as done. And I did this in the combined Agile board. So now if I switch back to the Jira course board that we've been working with, you can see that it is marked as done here as well. So it looks like we only have one item to complete in this sprint. So let's do that and also look at how we would close or complete a sprint. But before I do that, I just want to come back to the backlog view and let me create some space over here. All right, what I want to do is I want to create a new issue, and let's just call this test added to sprint but not completed. So I'll hit enter, and what I'm going to do is from the backlog, so from here maybe I can move it to the top of the backlog, and in many scenarios the development team might be working on a sprint, and either they're able to finish all the work early on and so then are able to bring in additional items from the backlog into the sprint, or there might be some urgent items that come up that need to get squeezed into the sprint, thereby leaving some of the initially planned features as unable to complete. So I just wanted to show you what it would look like in any one of those scenarios. So I can right click this task and I can send it into the currently ongoing JC Sprint 1. Now, Jira understands that it's important to respect the scope of the sprint and stay true to what had been forecasted initially. So it just gives a friendly reminder that, hey, you're moving this into an active sprint, which can affect the scope of work, so are you okay with that? And the same thing would happen if you were taking an item out of the sprint into the backlog. So I'm okay with that, and I can just hit confirm. So the issue gets added into the sprint. All right, and now for example purposes, I want to modify one of the estimates of the other issues. So maybe I can use the one that we're currently on. And so initially it was 2 days. So maybe I made a mistake and put 2 days instead of 2 hours. So let me just make a quick edit there and hit save. Okay, so now we can come back to the sprint view, and you saw the new task that we just added to the sprint. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the existing one, the one we're working on, and mark it as done. And now let's say that we've completed whatever we can in the sprint, and so we should mark it complete. So let's go ahead and as the product manager, once again you would need to have the permission to manage sprints to be able to do this. And in the pop-up that we get, we can see that, all right, 8 issues were done. There was one that was incomplete. So what would we like to do with the incomplete issue? We can either move it to a new sprint, or we can just move it to the backlog. So I'll select the backlog and let's hit complete. So now that the sprint is completed, Jira automatically takes me to the sprint report. And this is one of the reports that are available. You can see that we are in the report section of the project. And so this is one of the reports, and we're taken straight to it after the sprint's completed. You can see the sprint name, you can see the details of the sprint, who ended the sprint, the dates around it, and then below that you've got a burn down chart, and we'll take a look at this in more detail in just a little bit. But below that you can see the status report and a list of all the completed issues, and you can see here that it separates out the issues that were completed versus the ones that were incomplete. And you can also see that the one that was incomplete has a star beside it, and up here you can see that that issue was added to the sprint after the start time, so after the sprint was started. And then also, if you look at the issue where we had modified the estimate, you can see here that it kind of points it out that initially it was 2 days, but it was changed to 2 hours. So similarly, the overall estimate of the sprint was also modified accordingly. And then if you want, you can pop this list open in the issue navigator if you want to look at all the details one by one. So that's how easy it is to close a sprint. You saw that the one that wasn't completed would now be in the backlog, and we can plan it for the next sprint. And on the left side here, you can see that Jira offers a whole bunch of reports. Now, I won't go through all of them in detail right now, as I would really need a good amount of data to do so. Plus, it really depends on what you or your team might be looking for, but I definitely recommend trying some of these out and see what it gives you. For now, we can maybe just take a quick look at some of them. So one of the most popular ones, I feel, is the burn down chart. We saw one. It is the same burn down chart that's put in the sprint report, but it's got a dedicated page for it as well. Now, one thing I want to point out, actually, before I get into that, let me first explain how you would read this burn down chart. So basically, this gray line here is your guideline of how the work should progress through the sprint based on how many days are in the sprint, and then as the development team goes in and logs work, it burns down those hours that are remaining and populates the information on a day-by-day basis, thereby letting you see if you're on track or not. So in other words, the gray line once again is your guideline, and this red line you can see in the legend here is your remaining time. So as long as the red line is below the gray line, it means you're on track because you're burning down the amount of work, and the amount of work left is less than what is expected for you to meet your deadline here of 0 at the end of the sprint. The moment the red line starts going above the gray line, that's when you kind of start raising flags, and that's an indication where you may not be able to meet the deadline of the sprint. Let's see what else we have. Maybe we can take a look at the velocity chart. This basically populates how much effort or how many hours of work you were able to complete. And as you start and close sprints, it will continue to display this info for each sprint and give you an idea of what the team's velocity is or how much work the team can actually finish in a given sprint. So right now we only have one sprint, and it says that we had committed to this, but we had actually completed this. So as you complete more sprints, they will appear here one by one in a list format, and you can kind of take the completed time and average that out to scope out the future sprints. So once again, I definitely recommend you checking out some of these reports and see what they kind of have to offer. And one more thing we need to do before we can properly close off this section of the course is, remember we had created a version to track the next release. So let's go back to that. So you can see that the progress bar is fully green, which means that all the issues are done, and I can either release it from here, or if we go in, if we want to look at some of the details, and then click on release. So now it will ask you to put in the actual release date, and then click on release, and then that's that. So now the version is marked as released. So if I go back to the releases page, it's gone. That's because it's filtering and only looking at the unreleased ones. But if I select released, there it is. And so now it's there in your release history, and anytime you need to come back and look at all the versions in the past that have been released and all the issues that were part of it, you can view the details here. So that brings us to the end of a full sprint lifecycle. We started with a brand new project, populated the backlog, and set up our sprints in a quote-unquote sprint planning meeting. We started the sprint and moved issues to the done column while also preparing our releases in the form of Jira versions, and then finally completed the sprint and released the version. Hopefully you were able to follow along. And I recommend you trying it out yourself now and create some sample projects and data and go through the entire sprint lifecycle to give yourself that practice, especially when it comes to the functionality that Jira offers you.